Hey there, tonight we're diving into the bustling chaos of medieval Paris, where the truth is, surviving even a single day might mean dodging chamber parts from above and navigating streets that were more like open sewers. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You jolt awake as the first light of dawn sneaks through your wooden shutters, mingling with the unruly chorus of medieval Paris. Forget about snoozing your alarm. There are no alarms, just the ear-splitting cacophony of vendors already hawking their wares outside your window. The aroma of freshly baked bread might tempt you, but it's quickly overpowered by the less-than-pleasant scent of, well, let's just call it Parisian perfume. Welcome to 1350, where hygiene and city planning are still in their awkward teenage years. Your day kicks off with the symphony of the city, where church bells are the percussion section, ringing out the hour with a kind of medieval urgency. These bells aren't just for waking you up. They're the city's heartbeat, keeping time in a world where wristwatches are still centuries away. The bells remind you that it's time to get moving, because in the bustling metropolis of 1350 Paris, the markets are the epicenter of life. And trust me, you don't want to miss the action. Paris, with its roughly 200,000 souls, is a bustling hub of activity and commerce. The Seine River slices through the city like a watery superhighway, bringing goods from near and far. Picture goods being unloaded from small boats, then carted off to Les Halles, the bustling central marketplace. This isn't just a place to buy your week's kale and kombucha. This is where the economic pulse of the city beats strongest. Here, merchants and traders huddle together, haggling over everything from textiles to spices, each transaction a tiny cog in the grand machine of medieval economics. Now, if you're thinking of picking up a few souvenirs, don't expect any bargain bins or clearance racks. The economy here is tightly controlled by guilds, those medieval versions of trade unions. Let's say you want to buy a pair of shoes. Well, you better be on good terms with the Cobblers Guild, because they're the gatekeepers of quality and price. These guilds ensure that every shoe, every loaf of bread, and every iron nail meets a standard. They're also a handy way to keep out competition and maintain the status quo. Think of them as the original old boys club, but with more chainmail and fewer secret handshakes. But before you get too swept away by the romantic notion of guilds and markets, let's peel back the onion layers of this so-called city of love. Sure, Paris has its cathedrals and cobblestone streets, but it also has a hygiene problem that would make a modern germaphobe break out in hives. Sanitation systems are, shall we say, a work in progress. Waste disposal involves a lot more open windows and a lot less plumbing. The streets are rivers of mud and refuse, lending a certain earthy authenticity to the marketplace experience. And let's not forget about the delightful bouquet of the medieval streets. The combination of human and animal waste, with a side note of rotting food, is enough to make even the hardiest peasant pause. It's no wonder then that diseases spread faster than gossip in a royal court. The mortality rates are nothing to scoff at. Infant mortality alone hovers around a staggering 30%. The Black Death, still lurking in recent memory, has already claimed the lives of nearly half of Europe's population. Now, I know what you're thinking, but what about the romance? Ah, yes, the age-old myth that Paris is the ultimate city of love. If you're picturing moonlit walks along the Seine with a troubadour serenading you, well, you might want to adjust your expectations. The reality is more ducking chamber parts from above than dancing under the stars. The love stories of medieval Paris are less about candlelit dinners and more about practical alliances and dowries. Marriages often resemble business deals, with love being a delightful but unnecessary bonus. Yet, even amidst the grime and grit, there's a certain charm to this chaotic city. It's alive with the energy of people hustling to make their way in a world that's as unpredictable as it is unforgiving. So, strap on your medieval boots, mind the puddles, and dive into the bustling streets. Just remember to keep your head up and your nostrils closed, and you might just survive a day in medieval Paris. As you dodge the latest splash of unidentified street liquid, your path meanders through the labyrinthine alleys of Paris. These cobblestones have seen more history than your local museum and are just as treacherous. But fear not, you're on a mission to find sustenance, and in 1350 that means heading straight to the heart of every medieval diet, the baker. Bread, my friend, is the medieval equivalent of avocado toast, ubiquitous, essential, and sometimes absurdly expensive. In fact, it was so critical to survival that the French didn't just love bread, they practically worshipped it. The average Parisian consumed around 2 pounds of the stuff daily. That's right, 2 pounds. Gluten-free was not an option. But here's the kicker. Bread quality varied dramatically. The wealthy nibbled on fine white loaves made from high-quality wheat. These bougie breads were the kind that would get a Michelin star if they existed back then. Meanwhile, the less fortunate gnawed on coarser varieties, often mixed with rye, barley, or whatever else was lying around. This was the gritty, dense stuff that made your jaw earn its keep. And if you were really down on your luck, you got the bottom of the barrel, bran bread, the kind of loaf that might double as a doorstop. Reaching the bakery, you're greeted by the sight and smell of loaves fresh from the oven. But don't get too cozy. The baker is as much a businessman as he is a craftsman. Prices are dictated by the grain market, which swings like a medieval stock exchange. A poor harvest means bread prices soar, and hunger pangs echo through the city. But even in the best of times, the cost of bread could consume half the average worker's income. Yes, you heard that right. Half. Talk about carb loading on a budget. While bread was the foundation of medieval diets, it wasn't the only thing on the menu. Meat was a luxury and a rarity for most. Your typical peasant might see a slice of pork or beef a couple of times a year, if they were lucky. More often, they settled for the occasional chicken or rabbit. Fish, on the other hand, was a more frequent guest at the table, especially on those numerous fasting days dictated by the church. And let's not forget about the ale, the medieval version of a multivitamin. It was safer than water and consumed in impressive quantities, about 1 gallon a day for adults. Yes, 1 gallon. Cheers to staying hydrated. Now, let's talk about those medieval banquets that Hollywood loves to romanticize. Picture endless tables groaning under the weight of lavish dishes, where knights and ladies throw caution and table manners to the wind. The reality, not so much. While the nobility did indulge in extravagant feasts, complete with exotic spices and game, these events were rare and reserved for special occasions. The majority of the time, even the rich ate more like you than you'd think, albeit with better seasoning. For the average Parisian, survival was a daily grind, and ingenuity was key. Enter pottage, the medieval answer to what can I make with whatever's left in the pantry. This thick stew of vegetables, grains, and occasionally meat was the ultimate comfort food, if you could get your hands on it. And let's not romanticize it too much. Mystery meat wasn't just a cafeteria joke, it was a reality. But why was food such a struggle? Enter the economy, a beast with many heads. The Black Death had not only decimated the population, it had also upended the economic balance. Less labor meant rising wages for peasants, but also fluctuating prices for essentials. Add in the 100 Years' War, and you've got a recipe for economic instability that makes today's stock market look like a merry-go-round. Yet, amidst all this, Paris thrived. Its streets buzzed with the energy of traders, craftsmen, and those ever-optimistic peasants. The city's markets were the social media feeds of their time, where news, gossip, and goods were exchanged with a fervor that was almost palpable. The guilds, with their iron grip on trade and quality, ensured that Parisian products were the envy of Europe. But they also stifled innovation, maintaining a status quo that kept the old guard in power and newcomers at bay. In this bustling metropolis, survival was a delicate dance, balancing on the edge of scarcity and ingenuity. It was a world where every loaf of bread, every pint of ale, and every haggled price told a story of resilience and resourcefulness. So, as you navigate these crowded streets, remember, beneath the grime and grit lies a city of incredible endurance. Paris, even then, was more than just a city. It was an organism, alive and adapting, just as its people were. And as you munch on that hard-earned bread, take a moment to savor the taste of history. Because in a world without refrigeration or prepackaged snacks, every bite was a small victory. So, raise your mug of ale to the Parisians of 1350, who knew that even in the harshest of times, life was worth toasting. But don't get too comfortable. There's still more to uncover in this city where the past is never truly past. As you finish savoring that medieval morsel, it's time to lace up your metaphorical boots and wade through the bustling streets towards the crown jewel of Paris, Notre Dame Cathedral. Ah, Notre Dame, the majestic stone behemoth that's less of a building and more of a medieval skyscraper. Completed in 1345, it took nearly 2 centuries to build. That's right, 2 centuries. It's the kind of project that makes modern construction delays look like a breeze. But all that effort resulted in a masterpiece of Gothic architecture that was the pride of Paris and a symbol of the church's power. As you approach, Notre Dame looms over you like a giant, stone guardian of faith. Its twin towers pierce the skyline, and the stained glass windows, those incredible rose windows, throw vibrant colors across the stone floors inside. These windows are not just decorative, they're medieval PowerPoint slides telling biblical stories to the illiterate masses. Because let's face it, in 1350, the literacy rate was lower than winter temperatures in Siberia. Inside, the cathedral is a hive of activity. It's not just a place for Sunday service. It's the center of religious life, political power, and cultural gatherings. The church, you see, wasn't just in the business of saving souls. It was a medieval superpower with its hand in every part. Bishops and clergy wielded influence that would make your average king green with envy, and Notre Dame was the epicenter of this ecclesiastical empire. Here's a fun fact. Churches like Notre Dame were also the original social networks. They hosted everything from markets to meetings, much like your local community center. If your community center was also responsible for your eternal salvation. People came not just to pray, but to mingle, swap stories, and engage in what can only be described as medieval networking. Now, let's talk about the myth of the pious society. Picture the Middle Ages, and you might imagine a world where everyone was a devout believer, living in the shadow of the church. But the reality, more complicated than a medieval love triangle. Sure, religion was woven into the fabric of daily life, dictating everything from when you could eat meat, hello, fasting days, to how you swore an oath. Yet beneath this veneer of piety was a tangled web of corruption and political maneuvering. Take Pope Clement VI, for instance. He was the Pope during the Black Death and had a reputation for living the high life, complete with lavish banquets and a court that rivaled any king's. His opulent lifestyle raised more than a few eyebrows, considering he was supposed to be the spiritual leader of Christendom. But Clement was just one piece of the puzzle. The church was a complex institution where spiritual guidance often took a backseat to political gain. Religious festivals were the medieval equivalent of Coachella, drawing crowds from far and wide. These events were more than just religious observances. They were a chance to let loose, trade goods, and enjoy a break from the grind. Think of them as less solemn worship, more medieval Woodstock. The Feast of Fools, for example, was a time when the normal order was turned on its head. Clergy and commoners alike let their hair down, indulging in activities that would make a modern rock star blush. But while these festivals were a highlight for many, they also underscored the church's grip on society. By controlling the calendar, the church controlled the rhythm of life, ensuring its influence extended into every aspect of existence. Yet, beneath the surface, there was tension. The church's wealth and power were a source of resentment among those who saw a disconnect between the teachings of Christ and the actions of his supposed representatives. And let's not forget about the political power struggles that played out within and beyond the cathedral walls. The rivalry between the papacy and monarchies was as intense as a medieval rap battle, with both sides vying for control. The church claimed spiritual authority, while kings argued for the divine right to rule. It was a high-stakes game of chess, with bishops and priests often caught in the middle. A prime example is the Avignon papacy, when the popes resided in Avignon, France, instead of Rome. This period, from 1309 to 1377, was marked by political intrigue and controversy, as French kings sought to exert influence over the papacy. It was a time when the lines between church and state blurred, with both sides scheming for power and control. Despite, or perhaps because of, these power struggles, Notre Dame remained a beacon of faith and a testament to human ingenuity. The laborers who toiled to erect its soaring spires and intricate facades were the unsung heroes of medieval architecture, crafting a structure that would stand the test of time. Their work was a testament not just to religious devotion, but to the human spirit's capacity for creation and endurance. As you wander through the cathedral, take a moment to appreciate the intricate carvings and sculptures that adorn its walls. These aren't just pretty decorations. They're a visual encyclopedia of theology, morality, and medieval life. From the grotesque gargoyles perched on the roof to the stately figures of saints and angels, each carving tells a story of faith, of power, and of humanity's eternal quest for meaning. But don't get too caught up in the romance of it all. The reality of medieval Paris was far grittier than the soaring arches of Notre Dame might suggest. It was a city where the sacred and the profane coexisted in a delicate balance, where the spiritual and the secular were in constant dialogue. And while the church might have been the ultimate authority, it was not immune to the forces of change and dissent that simmered beneath the surface. So, as you step out of the cathedral's shadow and back into the chaotic streets of Paris, remember that behind every stone, every stained glass window, and every whispered prayer lies a story of power, ambition, and resilience. The people of medieval Paris were not just passive players in a grand religious drama. They were active participants in a world that was constantly evolving, pushing the boundaries of what it meant to be human. And with that, you find yourself back in the vibrant, bustling heart of the city. The streets are alive with the sounds of merchants haggling, children playing, and the ever-present church bells marking the passage of time. Here, in this living tapestry of medieval life, you are reminded that history is not just a series of dates and events, but a complex web of human experiences, each one a thread in the rich fabric of our shared past. As you leave the vibrant heart of Paris behind, your medieval day in the life itinerary takes a darker turn. The afternoon draws you towards the Place de Grève, a notorious square by the Seine River that's about to host a spectacle as grim as it is fascinating, a public execution. This is medieval justice in all its gory glory, a social event that attracted crowds like a medieval version of a blockbuster film, minus the popcorn and plus a whole lot of existential dread. Now, let's set the scene. The Place de Grève isn't just any old square. It's the beating heart of civic life in 1350s Paris. Picture an open space buzzing with people, merchants peddling their goods, children playing games that today would earn a stern talking to from any modern safety officer, and adults gathering for a mixture of commerce and carnage. Today, the crowd is here for the latter, drawn by the macabre allure of justice meted out in the most public way possible. You might be wondering, why was public execution such a spectator sport? Well, in a time before Netflix, these events were both a deterrent and a form of entertainment. They were a not-so-subtle reminder to the masses that crime doesn't pay unless you're paying with your life. The medieval justice system was less about rehabilitation and more about retribution. The idea was simple. Make the punishment so severe that it would scare potential wrongdoers straight. It was a strategy with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. But hey, different times, different measures. Now, let's talk crime. In medieval Paris, the justice system dealt with a wide array of offenses, from petty theft to the more serious crimes like murder and treason. Theft was particularly rampant in a city teeming with disparity. In fact, records from the time reveal that theft accounted for about 80% of crimes. That's right, 80%. It's like the medieval version of a five-finger discount was more popular than ever. And while you might think that the punishment fit the crime, you'd be sorely mistaken. Even minor offenses could lead to brutal consequences. Let's crunch some numbers. The penalties for theft could range from a public flogging to losing a hand, or if the judges were feeling particularly medieval, an execution. Yes, that's right. Steal a loaf of bread, and you might end up providing the entertainment for the week. And while today's legal systems might balk at such harsh measures for petty crime, back then, it was just another Tuesday in Paris. The crowd gathered at Place de Grève is a mix of anticipation and morbid curiosity. The square is flanked by the Hôtel de Ville, a grand structure that serves as the city's administrative hub. It's a fitting backdrop for the grim proceedings, a reminder that law and order ruled the day, even if that order was sometimes dispensed with a dash of chaos and a lot of bloodshed. As the executioner takes the stage, literally, a wooden platform erected for the occasion, a hush falls over the crowd. The condemned, shackled and resigned, is led forward. It's a scene that would make anyone question the romanticized vision of medieval justice. The reality, a world where justice was as swift as it was final, served up with a side of public humiliation and a heaping helping of deterrence. And what about the executioner, you ask? He was no common man, but a figure of both fear and necessity. Executioners were often shunned by society, living on the fringes despite their important role. Their job required precision and a strong stomach, qualities not found on your average medieval resume. Yet, for all the disdain they faced, executioners were essential to the functioning of medieval justice. Let's pause for a moment to reflect on the tools of the trade. The executioner's arsenal included swords for beheadings, ropes for hangings, and the dreaded wheel, a device that would give any horror movie a run for its money. The wheel, you see, was used to break bones, a punishment so brutal it was reserved for only the most heinous crimes. It's enough to make you grateful for modern legal reforms and due process. And speaking of process, medieval trials were a far cry from the Perry Mason dramas you might expect. Evidence, minimal, witnesses, optional. Trials were often quick affairs, with guilt assumed more often than proven. It was a system where the scales of justice were rarely balanced, tipping in favor of the powerful and leaving the rest to fend for themselves. Now, let's debunk a popular myth, the idea that medieval justice was all about fairness and chivalry. In truth, it was often about power and control. The nobility wielded their influence like a medieval cudgel, ensuring that the laws served their interests above all else. And while the church preached mercy and forgiveness, its own courts were known for their harsh sentences, meted out to anyone who dared challenge its authority. But let's not kid ourselves. Despite the brutality, there was a method to the madness. The public nature of these executions served a dual purpose, deterrence and spectacle. It was a chance for the authorities to flex their muscles, reminding the populace of the consequences of stepping out of line. It was also a community event, a shared experience that reinforced social norms and hierarchies. As the execution unfolds, the crowd reacts with a mix of horror and fascination. It's a visceral reminder of the thin line between life and death, and the capricious nature of justice in a world where the powerful often held all the cards. Yet, amidst the grim proceedings, there's a sense of inevitability, a recognition that this is the way of the world, for better or worse. In the end, the condemned meets their fate, and the crowd begins to disperse, returning to their daily lives with the grim reminder of justice served. It's a scene that underscores the harsh realities of medieval life, where survival often depended on staying on the right side of the law, or at least out of its sights. And as you leave the place to grieve, the sounds of the city begin to fill the air once more. The marketplace hums with activity, the Seine flows ever onward, and the bells of Notre Dame toll in the distance, marking the passage of time. It's a world in constant motion, where each day brings new challenges and opportunities. Yet, despite the brutality of medieval justice, there's a certain resilience to the people of Paris. They navigate this complex web of laws and customs with a resourcefulness that speaks to the human spirit's capacity for adaptation. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is light to be found, if only in the shared experience of a city that never stops moving. So, as you wander back into the bustling streets, remember that behind every execution, every law, and every punishment, there are stories of real people trying to make their way in a world that is as unforgiving as it is fascinating. And while the justice system of medieval Paris might seem alien to us today, it offers a window into the complexities of human society, a world where the quest for order was as relentless as the march of history itself. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the set, you find yourself drifting towards one of Paris's bustling taverns. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of your neighborhood bar, but with more tankards and fewer cocktail umbrellas. Taverns in 1350 were the social hubs of the city, where folks of all stripes gathered to exchange news, drown their sorrows, or simply escape the chaos of daily life. Forget the romantic notion of a cozy in where everyone knows your name. These were rowdy, noisy, and unapologetically earthy. Stepping inside, you're hit with a symphony of sounds. The clatter of wooden mugs, the boisterous laughter of patrons, and the occasional heated debate that could easily erupt into a brawl. Taverns weren't just places to drink. They were the medieval Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter rolled into one, where the latest gossip spread faster than a medieval plague. And just like today's social media, they were a melting pot of opinions, alliances, and occasionally outright nonsense. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing says a good time like a deep dive into medieval currency. In 1350 Paris, a pint of ale might set you back about a denier, the bronze workhorse of the medieval French economy. To put it in perspective, a skilled craftsman might earn around 3 to 5 deniers a day. So when you're raising that frothy mug to your lips, remember, you're sipping away a sizable chunk of your daily wage. It's a stark reminder that leisure, even in the Middle Ages, came with a price tag. The patrons in this tavern are a microcosm of Parisian society. You've got your craftsmen, merchants, and the occasional noble slumming it in disguise, perhaps to escape the rigid formalities of court life. But don't expect to see women mingling freely. Taverns were predominantly male domains, with women typically relegated to serving roles, or, in some cases, running the establishments themselves. It was a man's world, and the social structures reflected that, reinforcing the rigid hierarchies that dominated medieval life. For entertainment, forget about jukeboxes or live bands. Here, merriment comes in the form of minstrels and storytellers weaving tales of heroes and legends, their narratives peppered with enough exaggeration to make a fisherman blush. These performers were the rock stars of their day, traveling from town to town, spreading news and stories. And if a few details got embellished along the way, well, who's complaining? After all, a good story is worth a little creative license. Then there are the games, dice and cards being the medieval equivalent of Candy Crush, but with higher stakes. Gambling was as popular then as it is now, with fortunes won and lost on the roll of a die. And like any good casino, house always had its ways to ensure it came out on top, with tavern owners often taking a cut of the winnings, or ensuring the odds were just ever so slightly in their favor. But let's peel back the layers of this lively scene and look at the darker truths lurking beneath the merriment. Taverns, for all their joviality, were also breeding grounds for social unrest. The disparity between the haves and the have-nots was glaringly apparent, and as drinks flowed, so did grievances. It's no coincidence that many a rebellion was born over ale and grievances, the seeds of discontent finding fertile ground in these smoky rooms. And here's where we debunk another myth, the idea of the simple, joyful medieval life. Sure, the image of a rustic tavern brimming with camaraderie is appealing, but the reality was a society teetering on the edge. Social inequality was as much a part of the landscape as Notre Dame itself. The average Parisian lived a precarious existence, their fortunes tied to the whims of the market, the weather, and the ever-present threat of war or disease. Consider this. While the nobility feasted on roast meats and fine wines, the common folk scrambled to put bread on the table. This disparity was a constant reminder of the rigid social structures that defined medieval life. It was a world where your birth dictated your future, and social mobility was as rare as a unicorn sighting in the Bois de Boulogne. Despite the harsh realities, Parisians found ways to cope, creating a vibrant culture that thrived even amidst adversity. The tavern, with all its noise and chaos, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a place where people could gather, share stories, and find solace in the company of others. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, community and camaraderie offered a glimmer of hope. As the evening wears on and the tavern begins to empty, you're left to ponder the complexities of medieval life. The myth of a simple, joyful existence crumbles under the weight of historical reality, revealing a world where survival required more than just resilience. It demanded cunning, adaptability, and a fair amount of luck. So, as you step back into the cobblestone streets of Paris, take a moment to appreciate the intricate tapestry of history that surrounds you. The legacy of medieval Paris is not just in its grand cathedrals or bustling markets, but in the stories of its people, those who lived, loved, and struggled in a city that was both beautiful and brutal. And with that, your day in medieval Paris draws to a close. You've dodged chamber parts, haggled with merchants, witnessed the grim spectacle of justice, and shared a pint with the city's denizens. It's a world that, for all its differences, shares a common thread with our own, a testament to the enduring complexity of human society. As you wander back through the dimly lit streets, the echoes of the past resonate in the present, a reminder that history is not just a record of what was, but a reflection of what is. So raise a glass to the Parisians of 1350, those resilient souls who navigated a world as unpredictable as it was fascinating. They may be long gone, but their stories continue to shape the city that never stops moving, a living testament to the enduring spirit of Paris. In the days when the Mediterranean was the ultimate hotspot for sun, sea, and spectacular ruins, the Minoans were the cool kids on the block. These ancient trendsetters were living large on Crete, the largest of the Greek islands, and they were doing it long before your favorite influencer ever thought about posting a beach selfie. But don't let the pastel frescoes and elegant pottery fool you. Behind the beauty was an economic powerhouse that would make Wall Street sit up and take notice. The Minoan civilization flourished from approximately 2600 to 1100 BCE, a good 3,000 years before anyone thought to call Crete a vacation destination. Their success was built on a bustling economy, which was not just a chaotic bazaar of bartering, but a well-oiled machine of trade. They were the Jeff Bezos of the Bronze Age, except with more style and fewer delivery drones. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence of their extensive trade networks that span the Aegean Sea, reaching as far as Egypt and the Near East. This wasn't just a few trinkets exchanged at a seaside fair. We're talking about high-volume commerce that made the Minoans the envy of their neighbors. The centerpiece of Minoan grandeur was undoubtedly the palaces, with Knossos being the crown jewel. Built around 1900 BCE, this architectural marvel sprawled over 150,000 square feet, which is about the size of 2.5 football fields. That's a lot of space for hosting lavish feasts, storing grain, and conducting the business of the realm. The palace was a hive of activity, buzzing with artisans, merchants, and scribes, all working under the watchful eye of a ruler who wielded power with the subtlety of a velvet glove. And let's not forget the plumbing. Yes, you heard that right. The Minoans had a complex system of aqueducts and sewers, putting them centuries ahead of their time and probably saving them from some nasty diseases. Imagine the relief of not having to toss your chamber heart out the window every morning. It's the little things in life. But it wasn't all about the money and the grand designs. The Minoans were also connoisseurs of luxury, with a taste for the finer things that would make a pharaoh blush. Their art was vibrant and dynamic, capturing scenes of nature and society with a flair that suggests they not only lived life to the fullest, but also made sure it was beautifully documented. Wall paintings, known as frescoes, adorned their palatial halls, depicting everything from leaping dolphins to athletic youths engaging in the famous bull-leaping ritual. This bull-leaping thing, it's not just a myth, it's there in the frescoes, a sort of ancient X Games event that would have had the crowd on their feet or possibly fainting from sheer terror. However, let's not get carried away by the romance of it all. The Minoan world wasn't all sunshine and siestas. Their economy, while impressive, was heavily reliant on maritime trade. This made them prosperous, but also vulnerable. Sea trade was a risky business. A storm could sink your entire year's profit, and piracy was less a romantic adventure and more a brutal reality. Plus, they had to navigate the complex politics of the region, dealing with powerful neighbors who might have seen Crete's wealth as ripe for the taking. Now, what's fascinating is how this thriving Minoan culture influenced the Cycladic islands, a cluster of islands scattered like jewels across the Aegean Sea. The Cyclades were no strangers to civilization themselves, having developed their own unique culture characterized by those enigmatic marble figurines that look like they belong in a modern art gallery. These islands, strategically positioned along the trade routes, were perfectly poised to absorb and adapt the Minoan way of life. The Minoans, with their dominant sea presence, were like the cultural megaphone of the Aegean, blasting their influence across the waves. As ships laden with Minoan goods, ceramics, textiles, and olive oil sailed into Cycladic ports, they brought more than just merchandise. They brought ideas, styles, and techniques that would blend with local traditions, creating a cultural cocktail that was as potent as it was innovative. The Cycladic people didn't just copy the Minoans. They took what worked, added their own twist, and voila, an enriched cultural tapestry emerged. It's like when you try a recipe from your favorite cooking show, but add a dash of something extra that makes it uniquely yours. The result was a shared cultural sphere that, while influenced by the Minoans, remained distinctively Cycladic. But let's not pretend the Minoans were all about spreading goodwill and cultural exchange. Their influence over the Cycladic islands was as much about strategic dominance as it was about sharing art and architecture. Control over the Cycladic trade routes meant control over the wealth that flowed through them. And who doesn't want a piece of that action? By establishing strong trade links and possibly even political alliances, the Minoans ensured that they were at the center of Aegean commerce, with the Cycladic islands serving as willing participants, or perhaps more accurately, as strategic partners under a watchful eye. The palaces and ports of the Minoans were not just stages for economic exchange, but also political theater. They sent a clear message to their neighbors. We are powerful, we are wealthy, and we are here to stay. It's like a medieval castle on steroids, a billboard of power and prestige. The Cycladic people, savvy as they were, would have recognized the benefits of aligning with such a formidable force. After all, a little Minoan charm on your side could go a long way when dealing with less hospitable neighbors. As the sun set over the Aegean, casting its warm glow over the whitewashed walls and azure seas, the Minoans and the Cycladic people continued their dance of influence and exchange. It was a time of prosperity, innovation, and cultural cross-pollination that would leave a lasting imprint on the ancient world. The Minoans may have vanished into the mists of history, but their legacy lived on, a testament to their brilliance and adaptability. And so, as we peer back through the lens of time, we see not just the ruins of a lost civilization, but the echoes of an age where culture and commerce intertwined, creating a rich tapestry that would shape the future of the Aegean. The Minoans, with their flair for the dramatic and their knack for luxury, were indeed the original island influencers, setting trends that would ripple through history long after the last fresco had faded. Speaking of setting trends, let's sail over to the Cycladic islands, where the people were rocking their own brand of ancient chic. These islands, scattered like a necklace of pearls across the Aegean Sea, were the epicenter of minimalist aesthetics long before Scandinavians turned it into a global phenomenon. Cycladic culture, thriving from about 3,200 to 1,100 BCE, was all about sharp lines and sleek forms, embodied in those famous marble idols that seem like they got lost on their way to a modern art museum. Now, these marble figurines are the stuff of legend, standing anywhere from a diminutive 10 centimeters to a more imposing one. 5 meters, these idols are like the supermodels of ancient art, enigmatic, elegant, and instantly recognizable. But here's where the plot thickens, or thins, depending on your perspective. For a long time, the Romantic narrative had these figures pegged as mysterious religious icons, perhaps even idols of a great mother goddess. It was a tale full of ritual and reverence, which, let's admit, is catnip for anyone with a penchant for the mystical. But if you peel back the layers of myth, the reality is a bit less glamorous and a lot more practical. The truth is, we don't have a definitive answer on what these figurines represented. They could have been religious, sure, but they might have also been grave goods, symbols of status, or even early attempts at ancestor portraits. Talk about a versatile product line. Regardless of their original purpose, they were undoubtedly a hit, and their minimalist style has been captivating art lovers for millennia. So, how did the Cycladic people pull off this artistic marvel? Well, they had a little help from their friends, those Minoan influencers we just talked about. The Minoans, with their advanced technology and trade networks, were like the Bezos of the ancient world, spreading goods and ideas across the Aegean faster than you can say free shipping. The Cycladic islands, situated smack dab in the middle of these bustling trade routes, were perfectly positioned to catch the Minoan wave. The Cycladic culture wasn't just about pretty faces carved in marble, though. Their society was a well-oiled machine, humming along on the twin engines of trade and agriculture. Unlike the Minoans, who had palatial complexes to flaunt their wealth, the Cycladic people lived in smaller, more modest settlements. But don't let the lack of grand architecture fool you. They were savvy traders, dealing in obsidian, marble, and of course, those enigmatic figurines. Their economic structure was a tight-knit web of local production and international exchange, a precursor to the globalized economy we know today. While the Minoans were busy perfecting their frescoes and plumbing, the Cycladic people were borrowing more than just artistic inspiration. They adopted Minoan advancements in metallurgy, pottery, and shipbuilding, adapting these innovations to fit their own needs. It's like the ultimate DIY project, where you take someone else's blueprint and tweak it until it works just right for you. The result was a unique blend of Minoan sophistication and Cycladic ingenuity, a cultural mashup that would make even the most jaded hipster nod in approval. But let's not get too carried away with this picture of peaceful cultural exchange. The Cycladic islands were strategically vital, and their control was as much about power as it was about art. The Minoans, their eye on the prize, were likely keen to ensure these trade routes remained under their influence. It wasn't just about sharing the love, it was about securing the bag. By fostering strong economic ties, the Minoans could keep a firm grip on the Aegeans' wealth, and the Cycladic people were more than happy to play along, at least as long as it suited them. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Cycladic culture, one can't help but marvel at their resilience and adaptability. In a world where the only constant was change, these islanders managed to carve out a niche that was both distinct and dynamic. Their story is a testament to the power of cultural exchange, a reminder that while the tides of history may ebb and flow, the human spirit remains as enduring as marble. And so, as we leave the Cycladic islands behind, we carry with us a deeper understanding of how art and economics, myth and reality all intertwine in the grand narrative of history. The Cycladic culture, with its minimalist flair and strategic savvy, may have been influenced by the Minoans, but it was anything but a mere copycat. Instead, it stands as a testament to the creativity and resourcefulness of a people who knew how to make the most of what they had, and then some. Next, we'll delve into how this cultural juggernaut continued to evolve, setting the stage for even more fascinating developments in the ancient world. But for now, let's leave the Cyclades with the knowledge that even in antiquity, the art of borrowing and adapting was alive and well. Stay tuned as we continue to explore how these ancient societies laid the groundwork for future civilizations, one marble idol at a time. As we sail further into the cultural waters of the Cycladic islands, we dive headfirst into the colorful world of Minoan influence on Cycladic religious practices and art. It's like opening a new chapter in the history of ancient mashups, where the Minoans and Cycladic people created a cultural playlist that would have topped the charts of the Aegean Sea. Let's start with the frescoes, those vibrant wall paintings that transformed drab walls into visual symphonies. The Minoans were the original fresco fanatics, covering their palatial walls with dynamic scenes of nature, society, and bull-leaping athletes. The Cycladic people, not to be outdone, took this art form and gave it a spin of their own. They didn't just copy-paste Minoan motifs, they remixed them with local flavor. Think of it as ancient Photoshop, where scenes of Minoan dolphins shared space with Cycladic depictions of maritime life. This artistic exchange wasn't just about aesthetics. It was a visual dialogue between cultures, a shared language that spoke volumes about their interconnected worlds. Religion, too, was a melting pot of Minoan and Cycladic beliefs. The Minoans, with their pantheon of gods and goddesses, brought their deities along for the ride. These divine beings, often depicted in frescoes and sculptures, found a new home in the Cycladic islands. But let's not romanticize this as a peaceful co-op of divine beings holding hands and singing hymns. The Cycladic people absorbed these influences, sure, but they also had their own spiritual traditions. It was less about conversion and more about blending, creating a hybrid religious system that satisfied both local sensibilities and the cultural sway of their powerful neighbors. So, how did this cultural collaboration actually happen? Enter the trade routes, the ancient highways of the sea. These watery pathways weren't just for moving goods, they were the arteries through which ideas, art, and beliefs flowed. Ships carrying Minoan pottery, textiles, and olive oil weren't just glorified cargo carriers, they were cultural ambassadors. The Cycladic islands, strategically perched along these routes, were like the crossroads of the ancient world. They had front-row seats to the latest trends from Crete, allowing them to cherry-pick the choicest bits of Minoan culture and make them their own. But let's not get swept away by the romance of cultural exchange. It wasn't all cumbear and shared frescoes. The Cycladic people were savvy operators, aware that aligning with the Minoans meant more than just artistic inspiration. It meant economic and political leverage. By adopting Minoan religious icons and motifs, they weren't just embracing a new faith. They were making a strategic play to ensure their survival and prosperity in a world where might often made right. Now, about those trade routes, let's talk logistics. The Aegean Sea, dotted with islands like a giant game of connect-the-dots, was a bustling maritime network. Ships sailing from Crete to the Cyclades covered distances of up to 200 nautical miles, a considerable journey in the age of sail and oar. These voyages weren't for the faint-hearted. They required skilled navigation, sturdy ships, and a good dose of luck to avoid the ever-present threats of piracy and storms. But for the Cycladic people, these treacherous waters were a lifeline, connecting them to the broader world and bringing with them the riches of Minoan culture. The result of this exchange was a cultural hybrid that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Cycladic islands, with their minimalist art and strategic savvy, absorbed the best of Minoan culture while maintaining their own distinct identity. It's a testament to the adaptability and resilience of these ancient islanders, who knew how to play the game of cultural diplomacy to their advantage. As we continue to unravel this tapestry of history, one can't help but marvel at the complex interplay of art, religion, and politics that defined the ancient world. The Cycladic and Minoan cultures, like two dancers in a centuries-long waltz, swayed and spun around each other, creating a legacy that would echo through the ages. And while the frescoes may have faded, and the guards may have lost their followers, the story of their interwoven past remains as vibrant as ever. But let's not stop here. There's more to explore as we journey through this ancient world of art and influence. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the economic and social factors that shape these vibrant cultures, unraveling the threads of history one fresco at a time. Because in the end, it's these stories of exchange, adaptation, and survival that remind us of the enduring power of cultural connection, a power that resonates just as strongly today as it did on those sun-drenched islands thousands of years ago. So, we've got a fascinating blend of art, religion, and politics swirling around in the Aegean, but let's dig a little deeper into the political chessboard of the ancient world. This wasn't just a game of pretty frescoes and shared cultural motifs. Oh no, the Cycladic islands were caught in a high-stakes dance of power and prestige, and the Minoans were the ones setting the rhythm. First off, let's talk about the Minoan maritime prowess. These guys were the ancient equivalent of a naval superpower. Picture fleets of sturdy ships cutting through the Aegean waves like synchronized swimmers in a grand aquatic ballet. Their ships weren't just for hauling goods. They were the backbone of Minoan dominance, a floating representation of their far-reaching influence. And boy, did the Cycladic folks know it. With Crete sitting pretty at the center of the Aegean Sea, the Minoans had a prime seat at the table of trade. Their ships were the envy of the ancient world, not just because they were efficient, but because they were a clear signal of control. By 1600 BCE, they had the kind of maritime influence that made Poseidon sit up and take notice. We're talking about trade routes that stretched from Egypt to Anatolia, with the Cycladic islands as the essential pit stops along the way. This wasn't just about commerce, it was about control. The Cyclades were strategic gems, islands that offered both safe harbor and a vantage point over the bustling sea lanes. The Minoans knew that if they kept these islands under their influence, they could secure the flow of goods, ideas, and, crucially, power. But it wasn't a simple matter of waving a trident and declaring dominion. The Cycladic societies were no pushovers. These islanders were masters of diplomacy, adept at playing the long game. They didn't just roll over for the Minoans. Instead, they maneuvered through this complex web of alliances and rivalries with the finesse of a tightrope walker. They knew that their independence hinged on more than just acquiescing to Minoan demands. It required a careful balancing act of cooperation and autonomy. The Cycladic strategy was a clever one. They aligned themselves with the Minoans when it suited their interests, adopting Minoan technologies, styles, and even some religious practices. but they also maintained their distinct cultural identity. This was a savvy move, akin to a modern small nation playing both sides of a geopolitical fence. By doing so, they ensured that they could maximize their own prosperity without becoming mere vassals to the Cretan juggernaut. Now, let's bust a myth or two. It's tempting to think of the Minoan-Cycladic relationship as one of benevolent cultural exchange, a harmonious blend of artistic flair and economic partnership. But don't let the romantic narrative fool you. The Minoans were keenly aware of their power, and they wielded it with a deftness that was as much about intimidation as it was about influence. The Cycladic people understood that aligning with Crete wasn't just a matter of cultural preference. It was a strategic necessity. Think of it like this. The Cycladic islands were the Switzerland of the Aegean, neutral yet deeply entangled in the power dynamics of the era. They were shrewd enough to know that, while Minoan ships brought prosperity, they could just as easily bring conflict. So they walked a fine line, embracing Minoan gifts with one hand while keeping the other firmly on their own rudder. Economically, this relationship was a jackpot. The Cycladic islands were awash with Minoan goods, ceramics, textiles, and the ever-popular olive oil, while the Minoans, in turn, had access to Cycladic resources like marble and the much-coveted obsidian. This wasn't just trade. It was a symbiotic relationship where both parties reaped the benefits of mutual cooperation. But make no mistake, the Cycladic people were always aware of the precariousness of their position. They knew that their islands, though small, were strategically priceless. This knowledge was their ticket to maintaining a degree of independence, even as they danced to the Minoan tune. Theirs was a story of resilience, a testament to the power of strategic diplomacy in an ancient world where alliances could shift as quickly as the tides. In this dance of dominance and diplomacy, the Cycladic societies managed to carve out a niche that was uniquely their own. They weren't just passive recipients of Minoan culture. They were active participants in a dynamic exchange that shaped the very fabric of the ancient Aegean world. The Minoans might have been the headliners, but the Cycladic people were the savvy managers behind the scenes, ensuring that they got their fair share of the limelight. As we explore this intricate web of ancient power plays, it's clear that the Cycladic strategy was anything but simple. It was a masterclass in political maneuvering, a lesson in how small societies can navigate the demands of larger powers without losing their own identity. This wasn't just a story of cultural diffusion. It was a tale of strategic savvy and the enduring human spirit of adaptation. So, as we sail away from this chapter of history, let's remember that the Cycladic islands weren't just pawns in the Minoans' grand game of Aegean chess. They were players in their own right, deftly navigating the currents of power and influence to secure their place in the ancient world. And while the waves of time may have washed away much of their story, the echoes of their clever diplomacy still resonate, a reminder of the enduring dance between dominance and independence. Stay tuned, because the saga of the Cycladic and Minoan worlds is far from over. There's still much to uncover as we chart the course of these ancient civilizations, exploring the profound impact they left on the tapestry of history. As we chart the course of these ancient civilizations, let's steer into the storm that marked the decline of Minoan dominance, a tempest that would reshape the Aegean world and leave the Cycladic islands to navigate their own path. So, what exactly went wrong for the Minoans, the original Mediterranean influencers with a flair for frescoes and maritime mastery? Well, buckle up, because this is a tale of natural disasters, economic upheaval, and the age-old drama of power shifts. First, let's talk about the elephant in the Aegean, the volcanic eruption on the island of Theresa around 1600 BCE. This cataclysm was no small hiccup. It was one of the largest volcanic events in recorded history, with the power to make even Krakatoa look bashful. The explosion sent shockwaves, quite literally, across the Aegean, causing tsunamis that battered the coasts and spewed ash clouds that darkened the skies. Picture a scene from a disaster movie, minus the CGI and popcorn. This wasn't just a geological tantrum. It was a game-changer for the Minoans, whose economy was as reliant on the sea as a modern-day influencer is on Wi-Fi. The aftermath of Theresa was a 1-2 punch. First, the immediate devastation of coastal settlements, and then the long-term impacts on agriculture and trade. The Minoans, who had thrived on their naval prowess and agricultural abundance, found themselves grappling with a crisis that would shake the foundations of their society. The once invincible maritime network was in disarray, and the economic lifeblood of Crete began to ebb away. But nature wasn't the only adversary at play. Enter the Mycenaeans, the mainland Greeks who were eyeing Minoan prosperity with the enthusiasm of a cat staring at a canary. By around 1450 BCE, the Mycenaeans had not only set their sights on Crete, but had also planted their metaphorical flags in the island's soil. Evidence suggests that the Mycenaeans took control of key Minoan sites, including the Grand Palace at Knossos. Archaeological digs reveal a shift in artifacts and architectural styles, indicating that the Mycenaeans weren't just visitors, they were the new landlords. Talk about an ancient hostile takeover. So, what did this seismic shift mean for the Cycladic islands, those savvy middlemen of the Aegean? Well, with the Minoans reeling from natural and political disasters, the Cycladic people found themselves at a crossroads. The Minoan influence, once as pervasive as sea salt in the air, began to wane, forcing the Cycladic societies to reassess their alliances and economic strategies. No longer tethered to the Minoan juggernaut, they had to navigate the choppy waters of change with their own sails. Archaeological evidence paints a vivid picture of this transition. The Cycladic islands saw a decline in imported Minoan goods, replaced by Mycenaean artifacts that suggested a new cultural influence. It's like switching from artisanal Minoan pottery to mass-produced Mycenaean wares, a shift that spoke volumes about changing political tides. The Cycladic people, ever the adaptable traders, pivoted to faster connections with their new mainland overlords, ensuring that their economic boat stayed afloat in these turbulent times. But the decline of Minoan dominance was more than just a reshuffling of trade partners. It was a cultural reckoning that forced the Cycladic societies to redefine their identity. Freed from the Minoan shadow, the Cycladic people began to embrace their own unique blend of artistic styles and social structures. They weren't just passive recipients of external influences. They were active creators in a cultural renaissance that would see them carve out a distinct place in the annals of history. As the dust, both literal and metaphorical, settled, the legacy of Minoan-Cycladic interactions endured, etched into the very fabric of these ancient societies. The Cycladic people, with their minimalist art and strategic shrewdness, had absorbed the best of Minoan culture while maintaining their own distinct flair. It was a testament to the enduring power of cultural exchange and the adaptability of human societies. Looking back, it's clear that the Minoan-Cycladic relationship was a complex dance of influence and independence. While the Minoans may have set the rhythm, the Cycladic people were adept at crafting their own moves, ensuring that their legacy would endure long after the Minoan palaces crumbled into ruins. The echoes of this ancient partnership still resonate in modern cultural narratives, reminding us that history is never just a simple tale of dominance and decline. It's a tapestry woven from countless threads of exchange, adaptation, and resilience. So, as we close the book on this chapter of ancient history, let's remember the lessons of the Minoans and the Cycladic people. They remind us that, even in the face of cataclysmic change, the spirit of innovation and adaptability can carve out new paths and shape the future. The Minoans may have vanished beneath the waves of time, but the legacy of their interactions with the Cycladic world continues to inspire and intrigue, a timeless testament to the enduring power of cultural connection. Ever heard of the woman who took Europe by storm while juggling motherhood with a crown on her head? Meet Maria Theresa, the Habsburg Empress, who ruled from 1740 to 1780. Picture this, a woman who had 16 children. Yes, 16, enough to field 2 soccer teams with subs, and still managed to run an empire. Talk about multitasking. Her rise to power was as unexpected as finding a kangaroo in Vienna. You see, Europe in the 18th century wasn't exactly a bastion of gender equality. This was a time when the idea of a woman ruling was about as popular as a snowstorm in July. Yet Maria Theresa, born in 1717 to Charles VI and Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, was thrust into the spotlight following her father's death in 1740. Charles VI, bless his forward-thinking soul, had foreseen the potential chaos his lack of a male heir might cause. He cooked up the pragmatic sanction of 1713, a legal hocus-pocus designed to ensure his daughter could inherit his lands. But surprise, surprise, not everyone was on board with this plan. When Charles VI shuffled off this mortal coil, Maria Theresa found herself in a precarious position. Europe's royal houses reacted like a bunch of cats thrown into a bathtub. They were less than thrilled by the idea of a woman in charge and saw it as an opportunity to pounce. Enter the War of Austrian Succession, a conflict that tested her mettle from day one. It was a classic case of new house, who dis? As France, Prussia, Bavaria, and a host of other countries decided this was the perfect time to challenge her claim to the throne. The war kicked off in 1740, right after she took the helm, and would rage on for 8 long years. Her adversaries were a who's who of European power players, each with their own ambitions and grievances. Frederick Roman II of Prussia, also known as Frederick the Great, was particularly keen on expanding his territory at her expense. He snatched Silesia from her grasp faster than you can say diplomatic crisis. Despite the grim odds, Maria Theresa wasn't one to back down. She had a will of iron, or perhaps, considering her circumstances, a will of titanium. She rallied her allies, tweaked her strategies, and threw herself into the fray with a mix of determination and savvy politicking. She was a master of the art of persuasion, employing charm and tenacity to secure support. Her ability to negotiate and form alliances was nothing short of legendary. Maria Theresa's early reign was a crash course in crisis management. She had to navigate a labyrinth of treaties, alliances, and betrayals, all while dealing with the everyday realities of ruling. Her knack for leadership was evident in her ability to maintain the loyalty of key figures in her court and military. She managed to keep the Habsburg lands relatively intact, a feat that would have been impossible without her strategic acumen and relentless drive. Her reign wasn't just about preserving her inheritance, it was about transforming it. She embarked on a series of administrative, financial, and educational reforms that would lay the groundwork for modern Austrian governance. Maria Theresa revamped the tax system, streamlined bureaucracy, and promoted education, believing a well-informed populace was key to a robust state. She was a reformer at heart, though her methods could be as tough as a $2 steak. It's easy to romanticize her story as a tale of a lone woman standing against the tides of patriarchal Europe. And while that's true to an extent, it's also worth noting that she wielded her power with a certain ruthlessness. She could be as pragmatic as a Swiss banker, making hard choices that sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. But in the cutthroat world of 18th century politics, a gentle touch was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Despite the challenges, Maria Theresa's legacy endures, not just in history books, but in the very fabric of Austrian society. Her ability to adapt, innovate, and lead in the face of adversity makes her one of the most remarkable figures of her era. So the next time you think about the challenges of balancing work and family, spare a thought for Maria Theresa, the Empress who ruled an empire and raised a brood of future kings and queens. Now that's what I call multitasking with style. Speaking of multitasking with style, let's dive into the economic whirlwind that was Maria Theresa's reign. It's like she looked at the chaotic jigsaw puzzle of Habsburg finances and thought, time to Marie Kondo this empire. The 18th century Habsburg economy was about as organized as a toddler's toy room after a sugar rush. Maria Theresa, ever the practical empress, knew that to maintain her power and keep the empire's wheels turning, she needed to centralize and modernize the financial system. Her approach was as bold as her decision to wear a crown while chasing after a dozen-plus kids. First up was the introduction of a unified tax system. Before Maria Theresa, taxation in the Habsburg lands was a bit like a potluck dinner. Everyone brought something different to the table, and it was rarely coordinated. She saw the necessity for a standardized system that didn't feel like financial roulette every time the empire needed funds. By implementing a more consistent and centralized tax regime, Maria Theresa aimed to ensure that the monarchy could reliably fund its operations, including those pesky wars that seemed as regular as the changing seasons. And here's a fun fact. In 1748, she introduced the contributio. a property tax that was applied uniformly across her domains. This was a revolutionary step for a realm where tax laws previously seemed crafted by a committee of drunk squirrels. The contributio was designed to fill the imperial coffers without resorting to the usual method of squeezing the peasantry like an overripe lemon. It was a bold move to ensure everyone, from the noble with 10 estates to the farmer with a single cow, contributed to the empire's upkeep. Now let's talk military matters, because what's an empire without a well-oiled war machine? Maria Theresa knew her soldiers needed to be as disciplined as her tax system, so she founded the Theresian Military Academy in 1751. This wasn't just any run-of-the-mill institution. It was essentially the Hogwarts of the Habsburg military, training future officers in the fine art of warfare, minus the wands and spellbooks. The academy was a testament to her understanding that a strong military was as crucial as a balanced budget. As for the students, they probably had to learn to balance a musket in one hand and a quill in the other, because Maria Theresa valued both brains and brawn in her officers. But let's not forget the personal side of Maria Theresa's economic juggling act. Imagine running an empire while managing a household that could rival a small village. With 16 children constantly underfoot, Maria Theresa had to be as adept with a budget as she was with a baby bottle. It said she even kept a ledger of her children's expenses, perhaps the original Mommy and Me finance class. If anything, this speaks volumes about her ability to prioritize and manage resources, both imperial and familial. Balancing the budget wasn't always smooth sailing. The Empress often found herself in the financial equivalent of juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Wars are notoriously expensive, and the War of Austrian Succession had already left a sizable dent in her treasury. But Maria Theresa was not one to let a little thing like a drained bank account stop her. She cut costs where she could, reformed the administration to reduce waste, and even pawned some royal jewels to keep the empire afloat. Talk about dedication. Her economic reforms were not just about numbers on a page. They were about creating a sustainable, centralized structure that could withstand external pressures. It was a delicate balancing act, like trying to keep a cake from collapsing while your toddler insists on helping. But Maria Theresa's reforms laid the foundations for a more cohesive and efficient state apparatus, one that could better support her ambitions and those of her successors. And let's not forget the human element in all this. While it's easy to get lost in the grandeur of empires and economies, Maria Theresa's reign was also about the people who lived under her rule. Her tax reforms, though pragmatic, were also aimed at reducing the burden on the peasantry, who were often the first to feel the pinch of imperial ambition. It was a tightrope walk between maintaining noble support and not alienating the common folk, an eternal dance that every ruler must perform. Maria Theresa's economic strategies were as much about survival as they were about legacy. Her ability to adapt and innovate in the face of adversity is what made her one of the most formidable figures of her time. Her reign was a masterclass in the art of governance, proving that with enough determination, you could keep both an empire and a household running smoothly. And as we continue to explore her legacy, it's clear that Maria Theresa was more than just an empress. She was a force of nature. Stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover about this incredible woman who redefined what it meant to rule in a man's world. Now let's shift our gaze from Maria Theresa's fiscal juggling to her groundbreaking social reforms, which were as ambitious as they were revolutionary. Picture an empress who saw her empire not just as a collection of lands and titles, but as a society ripe for transformation. Maria Theresa wasn't just content with balancing budgets and birthing future monarchs. She was determined to leave an indelible mark on the very fabric of Habsburg life. And she did this with a mix of determination, innovation, and a touch of the iron-fisted pragmatism that had become her hallmark. First up in her societal makeover was education. In 1774, Maria Theresa introduced compulsory education, a move that was as unprecedented as seeing a flying pig in the Viennese sky. Before this reform, education was a privilege, more often than not reserved for the well-heeled and well-connected. But Maria Theresa was having none of that. She believed that an educated populace was a powerful one, and she was determined to drag her empire into the Enlightenment, whether it liked it or not. The 1774 school reform mandated that all children, regardless of social class, attend school from ages 6 to 12. This was a radical departure from the status quo, a move reminiscent of a rock star smashing a guitar on stage, bold, defiant, and impossible to ignore. Of course, not everyone was thrilled with the idea. The nobility, used to having education as a class marker, reacted as if Maria Theresa had suggested they take up goat herding. They feared that educated peasants might start getting ideas above their station, like questioning why they had to work the fields while the nobility pranced about in powdered wigs. But Maria Theresa, never one to back down from a challenge, stood firm. She knew that a well-educated populace was key to a strong state, and she was willing to face down the grumbling aristocrats to make it happen. And then there was healthcare. The 18th century, a time when medicine often seemed like an elaborate guessing game, and cure was sometimes just a fancy word for oops. But in walked Maria Theresa, determined to change the game. One of her most notable contributions was her push for smallpox inoculation. Smallpox was the silent specter haunting Europe, feared as much as a tax collector with a grudge. It was a disease that didn't discriminate, sweeping through populations with the devastating efficiency of a plague-themed express train. Maria Theresa understood the importance of inoculation, and in 1768 she had her own children inoculated, a move that was both a bold endorsement of the practice and a PR coup. If the Empress was willing to have her own progeny pricked and prodded, then surely it was safe for the rest of the empire. Her efforts laid the foundation for public health initiatives that would eventually lead to widespread vaccination programs, proving that even in the 18th century, the best defense was a good offense. But let's not gloss over the challenges she faced. Implementing these reforms was like trying to knit a sweater with spaghetti. Messy, frustrating, and often resisted by those who preferred the status quo. The nobility, in particular, often reacted with the enthusiasm of a cat being introduced to a bathtub. They balked at the idea of their taxes funding schools and healthcare for the masses. Yet Maria Theresa, armed with her characteristic wit and tenacity, managed to push through these changes. Her exchanges with advisors and nobles were legendary, often peppered with the kind of sharp humor that could slice through the thickest bureaucratic fog. Imagine a medieval sitcom where the Empress, ever the straight shooter, had to navigate a cast of characters whose sensibilities were as outdated as their fashion sense. These advisors, set in their ways, sometimes needed a firm nudge or a verbal kick to embrace her vision of progress. Maria Theresa's social reforms were not just about improving individual lives. They were about strengthening the entire empire. She understood that a healthy, educated population was essential for economic growth and political stability. It was a forward-thinking strategy that looked beyond immediate gains to the long-term prosperity of her realm. And let's not forget, all of this was happening against the backdrop of an era when women were largely expected to stick to knitting and child-rearing, not reshaping the destiny of nations. So, as we delve deeper into Maria Theresa's reign, let's marvel at an empress who was not just content to rule, but to reform. Her legacy in education and healthcare is a testament to her vision and determination, proving that even in a world that often seemed stuck in the past, change was not only possible but necessary. And while her story is far from over, one thing is clear. Maria Theresa was a force of nature, a woman who defied expectations and left a lasting impact on history. So stay tuned, because there's plenty more to uncover about this trailblazing empress whose influence still resonates today. And while her story is far from over, one thing is clear. Maria Theresa was a force of nature, a woman who defied expectations and left a lasting impact on history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, because we're just about to dive into the political chess match that was Europe in the mid-18th century, where Maria Theresa played her hand with all the finesse of a grandmaster. Now, if you're thinking that European diplomacy back then was a genteel affair conducted over tea and scones, think again. This was the era of the diplomatic revolution of 1756, a period where alliances shifted faster than a reality TV romance. Maria Theresa, ever the strategic thinker, knew that her empire's survival depended on her ability to navigate this complex web of relationships. At the heart of these diplomatic maneuvers was the 7 Years' War, which kicked off in 1756 and dragged on until 1763, a conflict so sprawling it was like the original World War. Maria Theresa found herself in the middle of a geopolitical tornado, where old enemies became friends and former allies turned into foes. The stakes were high, and everyone involved was playing for keeps. Enter Frederick the Great of Prussia, a monarch whose ambitions were as vast as his ego. He had already snatched Silesia from Maria Theresa during the War of Austrian Succession, a move she probably viewed as the diplomatic equivalent of a slap in the face. Frederick was like that pesky neighbor who keeps borrowing your lawnmower and never returns it. Maria Theresa, however, had her eyes set on reclaiming her lost territory and putting Frederick in his place. In a move that would make any seasoned politician raise an eyebrow, Maria Theresa orchestrated a diplomatic about-face. She abandoned her long-standing alliance with Britain and cozied up to France. Yes, the same France that had been a thorn in her side for years. It was a classic, if you can't beat them, join them scenario, and it was all part of her larger strategy to isolate Prussia and regain Silesia. But this wasn't just a simple game of swapping partners at the diplomatic dance. The alliance with France was brokered through a marriage contract that would send her daughter, Marie Antoinette, to the French court. Ah, Marie Antoinette, the future Queen of France, famous for allegedly suggesting the starving peasants eat cake. Spoiler alert. She didn't actually say that, was a key pawn in her mother's diplomatic strategy. Maria Theresa and Frederick the Great's relationship was a dynamic past due of political maneuvering. Frederick might have been a military genius, but Maria Theresa was no slouch when it came to playing the long game. She was like a chess player willing to sacrifice a knight to check the king. In the end, the 7 Years' War didn't yield the territorial gains Maria Theresa had hoped for, but it did cement her reputation as a formidable ruler who could hold her own against Europe's heavyweights. Now, let's bust a few myths here, because the romanticized version of Maria Theresa's diplomatic prowess often overlooks the gritty realities. Yes, she was a savvy negotiator, but she also had to contend with a volatile cocktail of court politics, family squabbles, and international intrigue. Her court was a hotbed of gossip, backstabbing, and politicking, more Game of Thrones than Downton Abbey. And let's not forget the economic dimension of these alliances. War was an expensive hobby, and Maria Theresa's coffers were constantly being drained to fund military campaigns. The cost of war was like that monster under the bed. You could ignore it for a while, but eventually it would come back to haunt you. The 7 Years' War alone cost the Habsburg monarchy around 200 million florins, a sum that would make any treasurer break out in a cold sweat. Maria Theresa's diplomatic strategies were as much about survival as they were about power. She was constantly treading the fine line between being a formidable ruler and a pragmatic one. Her ability to adapt to changing circumstances, whether through shifting alliances or tactical marriages, showcased a political acumen that was as sharp as a rapier. But let's not sugarcoat it. Diplomacy in the 18th century was a brutal business. It wasn't just about signing treaties and hosting fancy balls. It was about making hard choices that often left everyone involved feeling like they'd just tangled with a particularly grumpy bear. Yet Maria Theresa, with her trademark blend of charm and tenacity, managed to steer her empire through the treacherous waters of European politics. So, as we leave Maria Theresa navigating the stormy seas of diplomacy, let's appreciate her role as both a strategist and a mother. Her ability to juggle these dual roles was nothing short of extraordinary, and her legacy in the realm of international relations is a testament to her skills as a leader. But remember, there's still more to explore about this remarkable woman who managed to keep her empire afloat amidst the chaos. Stay tuned for more tales of intrigue, strategy, and the occasional royal scandal. Maria Theresa's legacy, like a fine tapestry, is woven from threads of ambition, hardship, and a touch of imperial flair. Her reign was a masterclass in ruling with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. She wasn't just the woman who kept the Habsburg Empire ticking along. She was the architect of a modern Austria, sowing seeds that would sprout long after her time. Now, let's unravel the finer details of how this Empress managed to leave such an indelible mark on history. First, let's talk governance. Maria Theresa's reforms were nothing short of revolutionary. She took the sprawling, somewhat dysfunctional Habsburg bureaucracy and gave it a much-needed facelift. Imagine a bureaucratic fixer-upper that hadn't seen a renovation since the Dark Ages. Her administrative reforms were like swapping out the old horse-drawn cart for a shiny new carriage, streamlined, efficient, and fit for purpose. She introduced a centralized government, cutting through red tape like a hot knife through butter. Her reforms laid the groundwork for what would become a more cohesive and functionally modern state. Economically, Maria Theresa knew that a robust financial system was the bedrock of a powerful empire. Her introduction of a unified tax system was a game-changer, the kind you'd expect from a savvy CEO rather than a monarch juggling 16 kids. By implementing reforms like the contributio, she ensured a steady flow of revenue that kept her empire financially afloat, even when wars threatened to sink it. The economic stability she cultivated was not just about keeping the lights on. It was about securing a legacy of prosperity and resilience. But let's not pretend it was all smooth sailing. Implementing these reforms was akin to herding cats on a windy day. The nobility, those perennial stick-in-the-muds, resisted change like a toddler refusing broccoli. Yet Maria Theresa, with her characteristic determination, pushed through. She knew that an efficient administration and a sound economy were essential for the empire's long-term survival. Her ability to see the bigger picture and act decisively is what set her apart from many of her contemporaries. Now, we can't talk about Maria Theresa without touching on her role as a mother. Her brood of 16 children wasn't just a footnote in her biography. It was a crucial part of her political strategy. She married her children off like chess pieces, strategically placing them across Europe to secure alliances and strengthen her empire's position. This strategy was as much about expanding the Habsburg influence as it was about ensuring a stable future for her lineage. It's the kind of dynasty building that would make any reality TV family look quaint by comparison. Yet, for all her strategic brilliance, Maria Theresa's reign wasn't without its contradictions. She was a reformer who clung to tradition, a progressive thinker who upheld conservative values. Her religious policies, for instance, were a mixed bag. While she was a devout Catholic who enforced religious conformity, she also understood the need for tolerance and pragmatism in a multi-ethnic empire. It was a balancing act worthy of the finest tightrope walker, and she performed it with aplomb. And then there's the myth of Maria Theresa, the romanticized version of the Empress, who single-handedly defied the male-dominated world of 18th century Europe. While there's truth in this narrative, she was indeed a trailblazer. It glosses over the complexities of her reign. She was not just a lone heroine. She was a shrewd politician who worked within the system to achieve her goals. Her success was as much about her ability to navigate the patriarchal structures of her time as it was about her personal strength. In the end, Maria Theresa's legacy is a testament to her ability to adapt and innovate. Her reforms laid the foundation for modern Austrian governance, and her impact can still be felt today. She was a ruler who understood that power was not just about wielding authority, but about improving the lives of her subjects. Her reign was a balancing act of ambition and pragmatism, a dance between tradition and progress. As we wrap up this journey through Maria Theresa's life, it's clear that she was more than just a figurehead. She was a force of nature, a woman who defied expectations and carved out a legacy that continues to resonate. Her story is a reminder that history is not just about the grand events and sweeping narratives. It's about the people who shaped them, the decisions they made, and the impact they left behind. Maria Theresa's life was a symphony of contradictions and achievements, a testament to the power of determination and vision. So, the next time you find yourself pondering the challenges of leadership, spare a thought for the Empress who balanced an empire, a family, and the future with unwavering resolve. Her story is one of resilience and reform, a legacy that reminds us that even in the face of adversity, greatness can be achieved. And with that, dear listener, we bid farewell to Maria Theresa, a woman whose impact transcends the pages of history and continues to inspire. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the man we all know as the indomitable force of non-violence, started out in a far less dramatic fashion than you might think. Picture a boy, not in a loincloth or leading protests, but in a small town called Porbandar on the western coast of India. What was he up to? Garbling sweets like they were going out of style. Young Gandhi had a weakness for the sugary stuff that would make Willy Wonka envious. It said he'd spend his pocket money, not on books or educational trinkets, but on sweets. The man who would later champion austerity had a sweet tooth that could rival any kid in the neighborhood. Now, Gandhi's teenage years weren't exactly the stuff of legend, at least not the kind you'd expect from a future leader of mass movements. He was an awkward teenager, as most of us are, grappling with the typical adolescent desire to fit in. But Gandhi's attempts at dancing lessons, oh, those were something else. Imagine a young Gandhi trying to master the two-step. He was about as graceful as a fish on land. His ventures into dancing were short-lived, as he quickly realized that his skills were better suited to the rhythms of rhetoric than the waltz. Gandhi wasn't just trying to learn new moves on the dance floor. He was also navigating the curious path that would lead him to a career in law, quite by accident. Yes, the man who would later dissect legal systems with the precision of a surgeon started off as a rather reluctant lawyer. Gandhi's journey to becoming a barrister was less about a burning passion for justice and more about a mix of family expectations and a touch of serendipity. In 1888, at the ripe age of 18, he was shipped off to London to study law, a decision that was more about social status than any intrinsic calling. The idea was simple. A law degree was a ticket to respectability, and who could argue with that? But let's backtrack to his adolescence because, contrary to the myth of Gandhi being a youthful saint, his early years were peppered with the kind of mischief you'd expect from any teenager trying to find his way. Take, for example, the time he pilfered money from a servant to buy cigarettes. Yes, before he was burning British cloth, he was burning tobacco. Of course, this led to immense guilt, something Gandhi was quite familiar with, and he ended up confessing his sins to his father in a tearful letter. This episode is often romanticized as a pivotal moment of moral awakening, but let's be real, it was more of a typical teenage blunder met with paternal disappointment. In London, Gandhi was a fish out of water, navigating his way through a culture that was as foreign to him as his dancing skills were to rhythm. The young Gandhi, with his pronounced accent and distinctive appearance, stood out in the sea of bowler hats and frock coats. But did he let that stop him? Not a chance. He was determined to fit in, even if it meant adopting a faux British lifestyle. This included everything from learning to tie a cravat to mastering the art of eating with a fork and knife. And let's not forget the time he tried his hand at elocution lessons to iron out his accent. It was a valiant effort, though the results were mixed at best. His life in London was not just about blending in, but also about soaking up the intellectual fervor of the time. Gandhi devoured books on philosophy, religion, and law, trying to make sense of the world around him. He was particularly drawn to the works of Tolstoy and the Bhagavad Gita, texts that would later be instrumental in shaping his philosophies. But at this point, Gandhi was still finding his feet, both literally and metaphorically. Fast forward a bit, and Gandhi returned to India in 1891, law degree in hand, ready to conquer the courtroom, or so he thought. His legal career didn't exactly take off with a bang. In fact, his first court case was a bit of a disaster. As the story goes, he was so nervous that he froze in front of the judge and couldn't utter a word. Let's just say it was a humbling start for the man who would later speak to millions. Gandhi's early life is a testament to the fact that even the most iconic figures had their fair share of awkwardness and missteps. It's easy to cast him as a paragon of virtue from the get-go, but that's not the whole story. Behind the legend was a young man trying to find his way, making mistakes and learning from them. The journey from a sweet-toothed, awkward teenager to the revolutionary Mahatma was anything but straightforward. And isn't that what makes his story all the more relatable? So, Gandhi's early life was a patchwork of missteps and learning moments, and his time in London was no exception. When you think of London in the late 19th century, picture a bustling metropolis with fog so thick you could cut it with a butter knife, and a society obsessed with etiquette so elaborate it made a royal banquet look casual. Into this mix dropped a young Gandhi, armed with little more than his ambition and a complete lack of awareness about what he was getting into. Let's talk about Gandhi's culinary adventures, or misadventures, if you will. The young lawyer-to-be arrived in London with curiosity aplenty, especially when it came to food. You see, in India, Gandhi had dabbled in the idea of eating meat, intrigued by the notion that it might make him stronger. His family was strictly vegetarian, so this was akin to a teenage rebellion, but with a side of beef. However, in London, he found himself in a society where a meal without meat was as rare as a day without rain. Gandhi's initial foray into the carnivorous world was not a triumphant one. Picture him at a dining table, surrounded by roast beef and Yorkshire pudding, trying to muster the courage to take a bite. Spoiler alert, it didn't go well. He found the taste disagreeable and the experience unsettling. It was a short-lived experiment in omnivorism. Gandhi soon discovered the London Vegetarian Society, a haven for those who, like him, preferred their food without a face. He became not only a dedicated member, but also an active participant, writing articles for their journal. By the time he left London, he was a committed vegetarian, a decision that would later become a cornerstone of his philosophy. But food wasn't the only thing Gandhi struggled with. His attempts to fit into British society were a comedy of errors. Take the infamous ballroom dancing lessons. Gandhi, ever the diligent student, thought that perhaps mastering the waltz would help him blend in. Imagine him, stiff as a board, trying to glide across the floor. It's safe to say Fred Astaire had nothing to worry about. His brief dalliance with dancing was more a testament to his willingness to try new things than any real passion for the foxtrot. Then there was the matter of attire. Gandhi's wardrobe in London was an eclectic mix of Indian sensibilities and British formality. He even donned a top hat, a sight that would have made anyone familiar with his later life do a double take. The top hat, the cravat, the tailored suits, they were all part of his attempt to navigate the social labyrinth of London. He was trying to fit in, but the more he tried, the more he realized how out of place he was. Despite these cultural missteps, Gandhi's time in London was transformative. He was exposed to new ideas, philosophies, and people that would shape his worldview. It was here that he first read Tolstoy's Asterisk, The Kingdom of God is Within You Asterisk, a book that deeply influenced his thinking. It was also in London that he encountered the Bhagavad Gita, a text that would become his spiritual and moral guide. Gandhi's intellectual journey in London was like a buffet of ideas, and he was sampling everything on offer: philosophy, religion, and politics. But let's not romanticize his London years too much. While it's tempting to imagine Gandhi as a young intellectual on a mission, the reality was more mundane. He was a student trying to pass his exams, often struggling with the coursework. The law was not his first love. It was more of a marriage of convenience, a means to an end. Yet, despite his lack of passion for the subject, he threw himself into his studies with the kind of determination that would later become his hallmark. And let's not forget the economic realities. London was expensive, and Gandhi was on a tight budget. He lived modestly, in lodgings that were far from luxurious. His financial constraints were a constant reminder of his outsider status, but they also taught him the value of thrift, a lesson that would serve him well in his later life of austerity. Gandhi's time in London was a period of contradictions and contrasts. He was a young man trying to find his place in a world that was both fascinating and alien. His attempts to assimilate were met with varying degrees of success, but through it all, he remained curious, resilient, and reflective. It was a time of self-discovery, where he began to embrace his Indian identity rather than hide it. The boy who left India was not the same man who returned. He had been transformed by his experiences, and those experiences laid the groundwork for the leader he would become. As Gandhi packed his bags to return to India in 1891, it was with a law degree in hand and a mind teeming with ideas. His London years had been a crucible, shaping his future path in ways he couldn't yet foresee. But for now, he was just a young man heading home, unaware of the remarkable journey that lay ahead. Stay tuned, because the real adventure was just beginning. As Gandhi stepped off the boat in Bombay in 1891, law degree in hand, he was greeted not with fanfare, but with the sobering realization that a title doesn't automatically come with a clientele. Back in India, Gandhi's courtroom debut was about as successful as a lead balloon. His first case, a simple civil suit, left him tongue-tied, and his client, well, underwhelmed. If courtroom dramas were a genre back then, Gandhi's debut would have been more slapstick comedy than legal thriller. But let's fast forward a bit to 1893, when Gandhi's life took a turn as unexpected as a plot twist in a soap opera. He accepted a year-long contract to work in South Africa, a decision that seemed innocuous at the time, but ended up altering the course of his life and history. The journey from Bombay to Durban was a 23-day sea voyage, a far cry from the instant gratification of modern travel. Gandhi was about to embark on an adventure that would see him transform from a nervous lawyer into a pioneering leader of civil rights. Now, if you think Gandhi's time in South Africa was all about leisurely strolls on the savannah, think again. It was here that he faced an eye-opening dose of racial discrimination. In 1893, Gandhi was unceremoniously booted off a first-class train carriage in Pietermaritzburg solely because of his skin color. Yes, that infamous train incident wasn't just a minor inconvenience, but a pivotal moment. It was the spark that lit the fire of Gandhi's activism, a fire that would eventually set the stage for non-violent resistance. Let's put this incident into perspective. Gandhi had a valid first-class ticket, but the conductor was having none of it. The message was clear. In the eyes of the colonial establishment, an Indian man, regardless of his education or status, was less than. This wasn't just a personal affront, but a brutal awakening to the systemic racism rampant in the British Empire. And in a world where the cost of a first-class ticket was roughly £13, quite a sum in those days, Gandhi realized he was paying for something far beyond monetary value. Following the train debacle, Gandhi's year in South Africa was anything but quiet. He quickly became embroiled in the legal defense of Indian merchants who were being disenfranchised by discriminatory laws. But Gandhi wasn't just practicing law. He was experimenting with truth, a concept he would later expound in his seminal work, *, the story of my experiments with truth *. His life became a living laboratory, testing ideas of non-violence and civil disobedience, ideas that were as radical then as they are revered today. During this time, Gandhi's diet and lifestyle underwent a transformation that would make any wellness guru proud. He began crafting a diet that was simple and vegetarian, not just for health reasons, but as a form of ethical living. His experiments with food were part of a broader quest for self-discipline and austerity. Imagine Gandhi, once a sweet-toothed youth, now subsisting on a diet of nuts, fruits, and grains. It was a lifestyle choice that would stick with him, much like his commitment to non-violence. But let's not sugarcoat it. Gandhi's lifestyle experiments weren't just about personal growth. They were an economic necessity. Living in South Africa on a modest salary, Gandhi's frugality was less a philosophical choice and more a financial imperative. His commitment to simplicity was as much about stretching his salary as it was about spiritual enlightenment. In 1894, Gandhi found himself at the center of a political maelstrom as he organized his first major protest against the proposed legislation to disenfranchise Indians. This wasn't just Gandhi's political coming of age. It was the birth of a movement. The Natal Indian Congress, formed by Gandhi, was an early vehicle for organizing and amplifying the voices of the oppressed. It was a bold step in an era when speaking out against the colonial machine was akin to David squaring off against Goliath, armed with little more than a sling and a prayer. This burgeoning political consciousness was not just about resistance, but about redefining identity. Gandhi envisioned a community united not by race or religion, but by shared human values. His efforts were about more than just legal battles. They were about crafting a blueprint for social justice. And let's be honest, even today, who wouldn't want to be part of a club that champions equality and justice over status quo and oppression? But Gandhi's journey was not without its challenges. He faced legal battles that tested his resolve and forced him to confront the harsh realities of colonialism. The courtrooms of South Africa were not arenas of justice, but stages for the systemic prejudices of the era. Yet, Gandhi navigated them with the tenacity of a terrier, refusing to let the establishment dictate the terms of his struggle. As Gandhi continued to evolve, his legal acumen and moral philosophy began to coalesce into a strategy that would define his legacy: satyagraha, or truth force. This was not passive resistance, but a dynamic form of protest that demanded active engagement with injustice. It was a concept that combined ethical living with strategic resistance, a revolutionary blend that was both disarming and effective. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. At this stage, Gandhi was still refining these ideas, testing their limits and potential. His South African years were a crucible of learning, a period of trial and error that laid the groundwork for his future campaigns in India. Each legal battle, each protest, was a step toward the larger vision he was beginning to craft, a vision of a world where justice was not just an ideal, but a lived reality. In the midst of these struggles, Gandhi's personal life was also undergoing a transformation. He was becoming increasingly introspective, questioning not only the society around him, but also his place within it. This period of self-reflection was crucial in shaping his understanding of leadership and service. Gandhi was realizing that to lead effectively, one must also serve selflessly, a principle that would guide his actions throughout his life. As Gandhi's time in South Africa drew on, he faced mounting pressures from both the colonial authorities and within the Indian community. Yet, through it all, he remained steadfast in his commitment to non-violence and justice. His resolve was as unyielding as the granite cliffs of the Drakensberg Mountains, a testament to the power of conviction in the face of adversity. In essence, Gandhi's South African years were like a pressure cooker, compressing experiences and ideas into a potent mix that would eventually explode onto the world stage. They were years of growth, of struggle, and of profound transformation. And while the seeds of non-violent resistance were just beginning to sprout, the roots of Gandhi's philosophy were already digging deep into the fertile soil of his experiences. So, as we leave Gandhi in South Africa, amid legal skirmishes and lifestyle experiments, it's clear that the man who stepped off that train in Pietermaritzburg was not the same man who would one day lead India to independence. The journey was just beginning, and the world had yet to witness the full flowering of Gandhi's unique brand of peaceful revolution. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and the best is yet to come. As Gandhi's steamship chugged back to the Indian subcontinent, the man who had once been an awkward law student was now returning as a seasoned activist, ready to tackle the British Raj with a strategy as unconventional as it was effective. And so begins Gandhi's next chapter, saga of strategic antics and sartorial simplicity that would propel him to the forefront of India's independence movement. Back in India, Gandhi wasted no time in diving into the murky waters of colonial politics. Remember, this was a nation where the British had a monopoly on more than just power. They practically had a stranglehold on salt. Yes, salt. That humble condiment you sprinkle on fries was a gold mine for the British, who taxed it like it was caviar. Enter the dandy salt march of 1930, a protest as audacious as it was salty. Here's the scene, a 241-mile trek from Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal village of Dandi, with Gandhi leading a motley crew of dedicated followers. It wasn't just a protest, it was a pilgrimage with a pinch of theatrics. Gandhi, ever the showman, knew that nothing would grab headlines like a spectacle, and he delivered, turning the simple act of picking up a handful of salty mud into a seismic political statement. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This wasn't some spontaneous jaunt to the beach. The Salt March was meticulously planned, a masterstroke of civil disobedience designed to hit the British where it hurt, their wallets. By making salt, a necessity for every Indian household, the centerpiece of his protest, Gandhi was highlighting the absurdity of British taxation policies, and in true Gandhi fashion, he did it with a mixture of humor and humility that left the colonial government flabbergasted. Now, you might think that making salt is as simple as boiling seawater, but Gandhi's initial attempts were, shall we say, less than successful. Picture the Mahatma, squatting by the shore, trying his hand at salt-making. The first batches were more mud than mineral, fact that didn't escape the amused eyes of the British officials monitoring this so-called seditious activity. But what Gandhi lacked in salt-making finesse, he made up for in strategic genius. His message was clear. If you can't even control your salt, how can you control a nation? The humor was not lost on the Indian public, who took to marking the British with a fervor that was as refreshing as a sea breeze. But the Salt March wasn't just about Gandhi and his followers. It was a rallying cry that resonated across the subcontinent. Suddenly, Indians everywhere were defying the salt laws, boiling seawater in their backyards, and daring the British to do something about it. It was a nationwide rebellion that cost the British economically and embarrassed them diplomatically. And the numbers speak for themselves. By the end of the Salt March, over 60,000 Indians had been arrested, including Gandhi himself. Yet, perhaps the most iconic image from this epoch wasn't Gandhi making salt, but Gandhi in his evolving wardrobe. Gone were the tailored suits and top hats of his London days. In their place was the simple dhoti, spun from khadi, a homespun cotton fabric that became a symbol of self-reliance. Gandhi's sartorial choices were as deliberate as his political strategies. By adopting khadi, he was rejecting British textiles and promoting Indian self-sufficiency, a move that was both an economic boycott and a cultural renaissance. But let's be clear, Gandhi's wardrobe evolution wasn't just about comfort or climate. It was a calculated act of rebellion against the British economic policies that had devastated India's textile industry. The simplicity of his clothing was a visual manifesto, a walking billboard that shouted self-reliance to every Indian and economic threat to every British official. And it worked. The image of Gandhi in his dhoti became as iconic as his principles of non-violence, capturing the imagination of a nation hungry for change. As Gandhi's influence grew, so did the absurdities he faced. The British, in their infinite wisdom, decided that the best way to deal with Gandhi's non-violent resistance was with force. But here's the kicker. Every arrest, every act of suppression only added fuel to the fire. Gandhi's imprisonments became badges of honor, transforming him into a martyr in the eyes of his followers. Each time he was jailed, his legend only grew, much to the chagrin of the colonial government. And here we arrive at one of the most fascinating aspects of Gandhi's strategy, his ability to turn the absurdity of British rule to his advantage. The more the British tried to suppress him, the more they exposed their own heavy-handedness. It was like watching a cat chase its tail, endlessly amusing and ultimately futile. Gandhi understood that humor and humility were weapons of mass disruption, capable of undermining the British Empire in ways that guns and bombs could never achieve. In essence, Gandhi's return to India was a masterclass in strategic non-violence. He took the British playbook and turned it on its head, using their own rules to expose their hypocrisy. His movements were as much about reshaping Indian identity as they were about challenging colonial authority. By embracing simplicity and humility, Gandhi was offering a new vision for India, one that was free from exploitation and full of possibility. While the dandy Salt March and Gandhi's minimalist fashion choices were significant, they were just part of a much larger tapestry he was weaving, a tapestry that connected economic independence with political freedom, cultural pride with social justice. And as his influence spread, it became clear that Gandhi was not just a leader, but a symbol of the India that could be. But let's not wrap this up just yet. The story of Gandhi's peaceful revolution is far from over, and the road to independence is filled with more twists, turns, and yes, a bit more salt. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. And so, as Gandhi's non-violent revolution gained steam, the world watched with bated breath, wondering how far one man's humility could shake the foundations of an empire. But as Gandhi's public persona grew to mythic proportions, the man himself was grappling with the burdens of fame and the complexities of political leadership. Fame, as it often does, proved to be a double-edged sword, cutting both ways with equal ferocity. Now, let's dive into Gandhi's later years, a period marked by a whirlwind of political turbulence and personal controversy. Picture India in the 1940, a nation on the brink of independence, but also teetering on the precipice of communal violence. As the leader of the Indian National Congress, Gandhi was front and center, steering the ship through rocky waters. But unlike a captain who navigates by compass, Gandhi was guided by his unyielding principles of non-violence and unity, principles that, while noble, were not always the most pragmatic. By the mid-1940, Gandhi faced the Herculean task of negotiating India's independence, a process that was less about diplomatic handshakes and more about managing a political minefield. The British, ever the shrewd negotiators, knew how to play their cards, and partition, the division of India into India and Pakistan, became the ace up their sleeve. For Gandhi, this was a bitter pill to swallow. He had envisioned a united India, harmonious in its diversity. But the reality was far messier, with religious tensions simmering like a pressure cooker ready to blow. Let's not sugarcoat it. The partition of 1947 was a human tragedy of epic proportions. As the subcontinent cleaved into two separate nations, an estimated 14 million people were displaced, and violence erupted on a scale that was both unprecedented and brutal. Gandhi, ever the idealist, hoped that his calls for peace would resonate amid the chaos. But the harsh reality was that his influence, while significant, was not omnipotent. In the end, the communal violence that erupted during partition was a stark reminder that even the greatest of leaders have their limits. And here's where things get sticky. Gandhi's tireless advocacy for Hindu-Muslim unity was not without its critics. While many lauded his efforts, others saw him as too conciliatory, accusing him of favoring Muslims at the expense of Hindu interests. This criticism wasn't just a minor footnote. It was a significant factor in the political landscape of the time. The tensions reached a tragic climax when, on January 30, 1948, Gandhi was assassinated by Nathuram Guards, a man who saw Gandhi's vision of unity as a betrayal of Hindu nationalism. Guards' bullets were aimed not just at a man, but at the very ideals he stood for, a chilling reminder of how divisive identity politics can become. But let's shift gears and take a broader view of Gandhi's legacy. Despite the controversies and the setbacks, Gandhi's influence on global peace movements is undeniable. His philosophy of non-violence, or *ahimsa*, became the blueprint for future civil rights activists worldwide. Martin Luther King Jr., for example, was profoundly inspired by Gandhi's methods, incorporating non-violent resistance into the American civil rights movement. King's famous marches and protests echoed the spirit of Gandhi's Salt March, proving that the principles of non-violence could transcend cultural and national boundaries. Even today, Gandhi's ideas resonate in unexpected places. Take the 1989 Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, where peaceful protests led to the end of communist rule. Or consider the recent climate strikes, where young activists worldwide have adopted non-violent civil disobedience to demand action. Gandhi's legacy is like a stone thrown into a pond, with ripples that continue to spread far and wide, shaping movements that he could never have imagined. But let's not get too starry-eyed. While Gandhi's philosophies have inspired many, they are not without their critics. Some argue that non-violence is an idealistic approach that lacks teeth in the face of systemic oppression. Others point out Gandhi's personal failings, such as his controversial views on race during his early years in South Africa, or his rigid approach to celibacy and austerity. These criticisms are vital to understanding the whole picture, reminding us that even icons have their shadows. In dissecting Gandhi's legacy, it's crucial to remember that he was a product of his times, a man navigating the complex web of colonial politics, cultural identities, and personal convictions. His story is not one of infallibility, but of relentless pursuit. It's a testament to the power of conviction and the idea that even the smallest acts of defiance can lead to monumental change. So, as we wrap up this journey through Gandhi's life, what's the takeaway for our world today? In an era rife with division and conflict, Gandhi's message of unity and non-violence offers a timely reminder of the strength found in peace. His life teaches us that while the path of non-violence is fraught with challenges, it holds the potential to transform societies in ways that violence never can. Gandhi's story is a call to action, urging us to confront injustice with courage and compassion. In the grand tapestry of history, Gandhi's thread is one of resilience and hope, woven through with both triumphs and tribulations. And while his methods may not be a panacea for all of today's ills, they offer a guiding light in our ongoing quest for justice and equality. As we bid farewell to the Mahatma's story, we're left pondering the enduring relevance of his philosophies in our turbulent world, a reminder that the fight for peace is never truly over, but always worth pursuing. In the grand theatre of ancient history, the Phoenicians were the enigmatic seafarers who never quite got the starring role they deserved. Picture this, the Mediterranean Sea around 1200 BCE. It's not exactly a pleasure cruise. Think less Mediterranean cruise with a buffet, and more braving the temperamental temperament of Poseidon. Yet, here were the Phoenicians, deftly navigating those waters like they had GPS centuries before it was cool. These mariners weren't just floating around aimlessly. They were the original hustlers of the high seas. They didn't just master the Mediterranean, they owned it. From their bustling hubs in cities like Tyre and Sidon, they expanded their reach, hauling goods and culture across the known world. The Phoenicians weren't just merchants. They were the Amazon prime of their day without the luxury of 2-day shipping. Now, let's talk about their legendary ships, because these weren't your average dinghies. Phoenicians were the Elon Musks of shipbuilding, crafting vessels that could withstand the Mediterranean's mood swings. These cedar ships were the Ferraris of their time, except they didn't guzzle gas. They were wind-powered and eco-friendly, long before that was on trend. The cedar wood itself was a hot commodity, revered for its durability and resistance to water. The forests of Lebanon were the shipyards of the ancient world, and the Phoenicians leveraged this to build their maritime empire. Their ship designs didn't just float, they dominated. With sleek hulls and innovative features like the keel, these ships could cut through waves with the grace of a ballerina, albeit a very large wooden ballerina. They innovated the bireme, a type of ship with 2 levels of oars, which gave them speed and maneuverability. It's like they had the first sports cars on water. These innovations not only gave them a leg up on the competition, but also allowed them to explore and establish trade routes that were the stuff of legend. Speaking of trade routes, the Phoenicians had a knack for setting up shop in all the right places. Their key cities, Tyre and Sidon, were the equivalent of prime real estate on the Mediterranean monopoly board. Tyre was like the Wall Street of the ancient world, a bustling hub where trade, politics, and power intersected. Meanwhile, Sidon was the artistic sibling, known for its craftsmanship and production of the much-sought-after purple dye. This dye, extracted laboriously from the murex snail, was the ancient world's version of haute couture. The color purple became synonymous with royalty and wealth, and the Phoenicians were the gatekeepers of this luxury. Now, let's clear up one of the biggest misconceptions about these seafaring traders. The romanticized view paints them as swashbuckling pirates with a penchant for plunder and purple dye. But in reality, they were more like the original entrepreneurs. Their skill wasn't in piracy, but in savvy business acumen. They preferred trading goods over looting. Sure, they had to defend themselves against actual pirates, because the Mediterranean was a bit of a rough neighborhood, but their real talent was in negotiation and trade. The Phoenicians were cultural brokers, spreading ideas, technologies, and goods across the Mediterranean and beyond. They were the ancient internet, connecting disparate cultures and facilitating the exchange of not just goods but knowledge. The alphabet, for instance, that handy little tool we use to text and tweet, has roots in Phoenician script. This wasn't just a local impact. It was a seismic shift in how cultures communicated. Economically, the Phoenician trade networks were a marvel of efficiency and scope. They traded everything from cedar wood and glass to textiles and metals. But they weren't just in it for the money. They understood the power of cultural exchange. Their trade routes were arteries through which flowed the lifeblood of ancient civilization. They established colonies far and wide, Carthage being the most famous offspring, spreading their influence as far as North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula. While they were essentially the middlemen of the Mediterranean, they played their role with finesse and foresight. They were experts at reading the geopolitical landscape, forming alliances, and avoiding the pitfalls of empire building, like overexpansion. They kept their focus on trade and maritime prowess, allowing them to thrive while others floundered. So, next time you hear about the Phoenicians, remember they weren't just some romanticized band of seafarers. They were the shrewd, innovative, and sometimes ruthless merchants of the sea who laid the groundwork for modern trade. They were the unsung architects of the ancient economy, proving that sometimes it's the quiet power behind the throne that shapes history. And speaking of these unsung architects, it's time we take a closer look at their economic prowess, which was as impressive as it was essential to their maritime empire. You could say the Phoenicians knew how to play the long game in the world of trade. They weren't just about making a quick buck. They were in it for the sustainable win. Their trade empire stretched from the Levant all the way to the Iberian Peninsula. Imagine a network of trade routes sprawling across the Mediterranean like the ancient version of a sprawling subway map, each line representing a bustling corridor of commerce. The Phoenicians' trade network was nothing short of a masterpiece, a veritable web of economic activity that linked disparate cultures and economies. They didn't just sail their ships willy-nilly. They had strategic trading posts and colonies perfectly placed for maximum impact. Each stop was a carefully calculated move, allowing them to control and capitalize on the flow of goods. They were the original maestros of supply chain management, plotting courses that would make any modern logistician green with envy. Let's talk about Tyrian purple. This wasn't just any dye. It was the must-have accessory for anyone wanting to flex their wealth and status. Extracted from the murex snail, a creature that didn't exactly volunteer its services, this dye was painstakingly produced. It took thousands of these little snails to dye a single garment, making it the original, limited edition product. The process involved simmering the snails in large vats, a method that was both labor-intensive and notoriously smelly. It's no wonder the dye was worth its weight in gold, quite literally. Roman emperors and elites clamored for garments dyed in this regal hue, making it the Gucci of the ancient world. But the Phoenicians didn't stop at dye. They were the original glassblowers, crafting exquisite glassware that was both functional and decorative. Imagine a world without IKEA. Phoenician glass was the ultimate home decor statement. They innovated with glass in ways that left others playing catch-up. From vibrant beads to delicate vessels, they had the market cornered. And they didn't just produce this glassware. They controlled the trade, keeping their techniques shrouded in secrecy. It was like they had the patent on elegance and weren't about to share the recipe. The real genius of the Phoenicians lay in their ability to keep these trade secrets locked up tighter than a Swiss bank vault. They were the original masters of intellectual property, safeguarding their methods with a level of secrecy that would make any modern tech company envious. How did they manage this? Through a combination of tight-knit communities, shrewd business practices, and a touch of mystique. They made sure their trade secrets weren't just industry knowledge. They were a closely guarded family legacy. But let's not forget their trade routes. These weren't just random paths on a map. They were meticulously planned with precision. The Phoenicians understood the Mediterranean's moods and used this knowledge to their advantage. Their routes were the arteries of ancient commerce, transporting goods like a strategic game of chess. They had outposts and colonies in key locations to ensure they could trade with everyone from the Egyptians to the Greeks, and even as far as the Iberians and beyond. This network wasn't just about moving goods, it was about creating connections. The Phoenicians were the social media influencers of their time, spreading ideas, art, and culture along with their merchandise. They were the Tinder of trade, facilitating cultural exchanges that created lasting bonds between civilizations. And while they might not have swiped right, they definitely knew how to make a lucrative match. In this grand tapestry of trade, the Phoenicians were the master weavers, stitching together a network that was as profitable as it was expansive. They understood the power of branding long before it was a buzzword. Their reputation for quality and exclusivity was their calling card, ensuring that Phoenician goods were in demand across the known world. It's no wonder they became the middlemen of choice, trusted by kings and commoners alike. But let's not romanticize their story too much. The harsh reality was that the Mediterranean wasn't always a friendly place. Pirates, storms, and political upheaval were constant threats. The Phoenicians had to navigate these dangers with the same skill they used to steer their ships. They were shrewd negotiators and savvy diplomats, forming alliances and avoiding conflicts to keep their trade routes open. It was a delicate balancing act that required both courage and cunning. So, the next time you think about trade secrets, consider how the Phoenicians managed theirs. They were the trailblazers of ancient commerce, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in history is the subtle hand of trade, not the iron fist of war. As we dive deeper into their story, remember that their legacy is one of innovation, resilience, and a dash of mystery that continues to intrigue us to this day. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about these legendary merchants of the sea. While the Phoenicians are often celebrated for their maritime prowess, they were much more than just ancient sailors with sea salt in their veins. Their real magic lay in their ability to transform trade routes into conduits of culture. Imagine the Mediterranean not only as a bustling highway of goods, but as an ancient version of a TED talk circuit, with Phoenicians as the charismatic speakers who never ran out of ideas to share. Now, let's dive into one of their greatest contributions to civilization, the spread of the alphabet. Before the Phoenicians set sail, Writing systems were as cumbersome as a teenage boy's first attempt at poetry, convoluted and filled with unnecessary complexity. The Egyptians had their hieroglyphs, which were wonderful if you were decorating a pharaoh's tomb, but not so great for jotting down grocery lists. Enter the Phoenicians with their stripped-down, user-friendly alphabet consisting of a mere 22 characters. No vowels, because who needs those anyway, right? This was the ancient world's version of a sleek, minimalist app that everyone wanted to download. The genius of the Phoenician alphabet was its accessibility. It wasn't just reserved for scribes and scholars. It was the open-source software of its day. This democratization of writing meant that merchants across the Mediterranean could communicate with a simplicity that was revolutionary. It's like the Phoenicians handed out Rosetta Stones at every port, saying, "Hey, here's how you say I'll trade you my cedar for your olive oil in a way everyone can understand." And this wasn't just a local phenomenon. The Greeks, Etruscans, and eventually the Romans took this alphabetic baton and ran with it, modifying it to suit their own linguistic needs. The Phoenicians had effectively flicked the first domino in a chain reaction that would shape written communication for millennia. But hold on, before we go canonizing them as the patron saints of literacy, let's debunk a bit of the romanticized narrative. The spread of the alphabet was less about some altruistic mission and more about cold, hard commerce. The Phoenicians needed a quick and efficient way to keep track of transactions, contracts, and inventory. Imagine trying to record thousands of murex snails and their resultant purple dye using pictograms. It'd take forever, and time is money, even in 1200 BCE. The alphabet was a tool of trade, not a gift to humanity wrapped in a neat little bow. Now, let's talk about cultural exchanges beyond the alphabet. The Phoenicians were the original cultural ambassadors, but not in the way you'd think with diplomatic missions and peace treaties. They were more like the world's first cross-cultural party planners, bringing together diverse civilizations through a shared love of art, technology, and of course, commerce. Their trade networks were like veins through which new ideas flowed, carrying with them the latest in art styles, technology, and even culinary trends. You can thank the Phoenicians for the cross-pollination of ideas that gave us the fusion cuisine of ancient times. Take their influence on art, for example. Phoenician artisans were known for their eclectic style, which was a mashup of Egyptian, Mesopotamian, and local Levantine influences. Imagine a Pinterest board where every pin is from a different culture, yet somehow it all works. Their knack for blending styles made Phoenician art highly sought after, and as they traded these art pieces across the Mediterranean, they inadvertently became trendsetters. Even their glassware, renowned for its quality and beauty, was a cultural export that left others scrambling to imitate. But don't let the allure of Phoenician art make you forget the business acumen behind it. They weren't just trading these goods out of the goodness of their hearts. The Phoenicians understood that art and culture were commodities just like any other. Their knack for creating demand for their unique style was as much a part of their legacy as their cedar ships. They knew that a well-placed amphora could be as persuasive as a modern-day influencer's Instagram post. Technology was another realm where Phoenician trade sparked innovation. The Mediterranean wasn't just a sea of trade goods, it was a testing ground for new technologies. As Phoenician ships sailed from port to port, they spread knowledge about shipbuilding, navigation, and perhaps even the early use of iron. It's like they were the ancient world's version of a tech startup, iterating on ideas and sharing them with the world. You could say they were the original disruptors, long before it was a Silicon Valley buzzword. And let's not gloss over the culinary exchanges. The Phoenicians might not have invented hummus, but they sure knew how to trade the ingredients needed to make it. They transported spices, grains, and other foodstuffs across the Mediterranean, introducing new flavors and culinary techniques to different regions. Picture the Mediterranean diet today, and you have the Phoenicians to thank for some of that cross-pollination of flavors. They were the ancient foodies, ensuring that everyone from North Africa to the Iberian Peninsula could enjoy a good meal. So, were the Phoenicians just merchants, or were they something more? The romantic image of them as mere traders sailing the high seas is enticing, but it's only part of the story. They were the cultural conduits of their time, weaving together a tapestry of ideas and innovations that would shape the ancient world. Their influence stretched far beyond the clinking of coins and the exchange of goods. They were the silent architects of cultural bridges, connecting civilizations in ways that would resonate for centuries. As we unravel more of their story, it's clear that the Phoenicians were much more than the sum of their trade routes. They were cultural chameleons, adapting and thriving in a world that was as unpredictable as the Mediterranean itself. Their legacy challenges us to look beyond the romanticized tales and appreciate the complexity of their contributions to history. And as we dive deeper into their influence, remember that the Phoenicians were not just merchants of the sea. They were the unsung heroes of cultural exchange. Stay tuned, because there's more to uncover about these trailblazing navigators and their enduring impact. So, let's steer this ship into the choppy waters of Phoenician politics, where strategy was as crucial as a well-timed wind in the sails. The Phoenicians knew the secret to surviving in a world dominated by the colossal empires of Assyria and Babylon. Savvy diplomacy and a knack for playing both sides like a seasoned poker player with a killer poker face. These city-states weren't just about trading cedar and purple dye. They were in the high-stakes game of geopolitical chess, armed with limited pawns but a keen understanding of the board. Picture this: the Assyrian Empire to the northeast, with its penchant for expansion and a military that could squash a city like Tyre faster than you can say tribute. Then there's Babylon, always a looming threat with its own imperial ambitions. The Phoenicians, nestled along the Levantine coast, had a choice: get crushed or get clever. Spoiler alert, they chose the latter. These city-states were like the Switzerland of the ancient world, except they didn't have snow-capped mountains or chocolate to hide behind. Instead, they had their wits and a willingness to grease the wheels of diplomacy with hefty tributes. What's a few tons of silver and a smattering of luxury goods between frenemies, right? They'd pay tribute, sure, but they'd also ensure that no single empire got too cozy with their territory. It was a delicate balancing act, like keeping several plates spinning while navigating a stormy sea. And here's where the Phoenicians' real genius shone through. Alliances. They weren't about to go toe-to-toe with the Assyrian war machine. Instead, they played the long game. They formed strategic alliances, not only with empires, but also with other city-states and regional powers. These were alliances of convenience, sure, but they were also alliances of necessity. When Assyria came knocking with its demands, the Phoenician cities would band together, presenting a united front that said, "We're not as easy to crack as you think." Take the famous case of King Luli of Tyre. In the late 8th century BCE, when Assyria's King Sennacherib was on his conquest spree, Luli didn't just roll over. He fortified Tyre and took to the sea, leading a naval resistance that was part military maneuver, part strategic retreat. It's like he read the art of war before it was even written. Luli's defiance was a masterclass in how to use limited resources to hold off a giant. Sure, it eventually led to Tyre paying tribute, because let's face it, silver was cheaper than war, but it also allowed the city to maintain a semblance of autonomy. But let's not paint the Phoenicians as purely altruistic defenders of their independence. The truth is, they were pragmatic to the core. Their alliances were as much about economic gain as they were about political survival. By keeping the peace, or at least a version of it, they ensured their trade routes remained open, and their coffers stayed full. The Assyrians and Babylonians might have been intimidating, but they were also great customers. The Phoenicians knew that keeping these empires stocked with luxury goods was a surefire way to stay in their good graces, or at least keep them at bay. Of course, the Phoenicians weren't above playing their allies against each other. It was all part of the game. They'd cozy up to one power while subtly supporting its rival, ensuring that no single empire could dominate the region. It was a risky strategy, but when you're living in the shadow of giants, risk is just part of the everyday routine. The Phoenicians were the original masters of the double game, a feat that kept them afloat in a sea of political sharks. This constant dance with danger wasn't without its costs. Paying tributes drained resources, and alliances could shift with the wind. Yet, the Phoenicians' ability to remain flexible, to adapt to new political realities, was their greatest strength. They didn't just survive, they thrived, turning potential disaster into opportunity at every turn. And while their story doesn't end with them toppling empires, it does highlight a crucial lesson. Sometimes the most powerful tool in your arsenal isn't a sword but a well-placed bribe and a strategic alliance. So, next time you hear about these maritime merchants, Remember, they were also political virtuosos, orchestrating a symphony of alliances that allowed them to navigate the treacherous waters of ancient geopolitics. They weren't just merchants of the sea, they were diplomats and tacticians, playing a game where the stakes were nothing less than their survival. As we continue to unravel their legacy, it's clear that the Phoenicians weren't just riding the waves of history, they were charting their own course, one tribute at a time. Stay tuned, because there's still more to uncover about these cunning seafarers who knew how to play the long game. While the Phoenicians had mastered the art of navigating tricky political waters, they couldn't keep their sails full forever. As the sun began to set on their maritime empire, two new powers emerged to cast a long shadow over the Mediterranean: Rome and Carthage. It's a classic tale of ancient world musical chairs, and unfortunately, the Phoenicians found themselves without a seat. Carthage, once a Phoenician colony, rose to become a powerhouse in its own right. Picture Carthage as the rebellious teenager who outgrows the family business and starts a tech empire in its garage. Situated in modern-day Tunisia, Carthage inherited the Phoenician knack for trade and innovation. But instead of just following in their forebears' footsteps, they built an empire with its own ambitions for dominance. By the 6th century BCE, Carthage had become a formidable maritime force, rivaling its Phoenician progenitors, and setting the stage for a sibling rivalry that would make any family reunion awkward. Then there's Rome, the up-and-coming juggernaut that was busy turning the Mediterranean into its own personal lake. While the Phoenicians were busy playing diplomatic chess, Rome was sharpening its swords and laying the groundwork for an empire that wouldn't take no for an answer. By the time the Punic Wars rolled around, 264-146 BCE, Rome and Carthage were squaring off in an epic showdown. Spoiler: Rome emerged as the victor, and the Mediterranean map was redrawn with Roman ink. So where did this leave the Phoenicians? Well, by the time Rome and Carthage were duking it out, Phoenician cities like Tyre and Sidon were more like aging rock stars, still trying to relive their glory days. They were still around, strumming their lutes and trading their goods, but the spotlight had moved on. The rise of these new powers meant the Phoenicians had to play second fiddle in the grand symphony of ancient geopolitics. Their once mighty fleet was no match for Rome's military machine, and the economic clout they once wielded was gradually eclipsed. But let's not write them off just yet. Even as their political influence waned, the Phoenicians left behind a legacy that's as enduring as it is profound. Take their linguistic contributions, for starters. The Phoenician alphabet, that minimalist marvel we've all come to rely on, was the precursor to Greek and Latin scripts. It's like the ancient Rosetta Stone that everyone downloaded and modified to fit their own dialects. Without it, we might still be carving out grocery lists in hieroglyphics, which, let's face it, would make texting a nightmare. And let's not forget their nautical innovations. The Phoenicians were the Steve Jobs of shipbuilding, constantly pushing the envelope with design and technology. Their ships, with their sleek hulls and agile maneuverability, were the precursors to the vessels that would eventually dominate the Mediterranean. The Romans might have conquered the seas, but they did so standing on the shoulders of Phoenician shipwrights. Economically, the Phoenicians set the standard for trade networks that would inspire future generations. They were the original free traders, championing a model of commerce that transcended borders long before the European Union was a glimmer in anyone's eye. Their ability to connect cultures through trade laid the groundwork for the globalized economy we recognize today. Imagine a world where goods and ideas flowed as freely as the Mediterranean currents, and you have the Phoenicians to thank for that vision. Now, if we could somehow summon a Phoenician today, what might they think of our modern economic landscape? They'd likely be impressed by our global trade networks, essentially an evolved version of their own, but they might scratch their heads at our obsession with instant gratification. After all, these were people who understood that some of the best things, like Tyrian purple, took time. Would they be amazed by our technological advancements, or bemused by our inability to keep trade secrets under wraps? It's hard to say, but one thing's certain: they'd appreciate the hustle. Reflecting on their story, the Phoenicians remind us that influence isn't always about who holds the most power, but who sets the stage for others to shine. They were the unsung architects of a world that valued trade over conquest, dialogue over domination. Their legacy isn't just in the artifacts left behind, but in the very fabric of commerce and communication that continues to connect us today. In the end, the Phoenicians weren't just merchants of the sea. They were the original global citizens, navigating a world that was as interconnected as it was competitive. They taught us that true power lies not in the empires we build, but in the bridges we construct between cultures and ideas. So as you drift off to sleep with this newfound knowledge, remember, the Phoenicians were the silent currents beneath the surface, guiding the course of history long after their ships had disappeared from the horizon. On a stormy night in 1856, somewhere near the village of Smiljan in the Austrian Empire, a baby was born amidst flashes of lightning. Legend has it that Nikola Tesla's entry into the world was heralded by an electrical storm, as if the universe just knew this kid was going to be all about volts and amps. His mother, Georgina, must have thought that the dramatic weather was a fitting backdrop for the birth of a future inventor extraordinaire. Tesla himself would later joke about this stormy arrival, claiming it was a sign of things to come. But let's not get too carried away with the myth-making. After all, the past isn't a Marvel movie, and Tesla's life was more than just a collection of supercharged anecdotes. Born to a Serbian family, Tesla was the fourth of 5 children. His father, Milutin, was an Orthodox priest and writer, and his mother, Georgina, had a knack for crafting household devices, an early hint at where Tesla got his inventive streak. While Milutin dreamed of his son joining the clergy, young Nikola was fascinated by the mechanical world. This was a time when the Industrial Revolution was still shaking things up, and Tesla, even as a child, was more interested in gears than gospels. From an early age, Nikola showed signs of his peculiar genius. He was one of those kids who could memorize entire books, which sounds great until you realize he would do it just for fun. Imagine a child today reciting the entire script of The Matrix verbatim, not exactly normal playground behavior. But Tesla's brain wasn't wired like everyone else's. He was also prone to intense visualizations, conjuring up complex images in his mind before ever setting them to paper. This ability to mentally prototype would become a hallmark of his inventive process. By the time he was 6, Tesla had already built a small water wheel, and he wasn't even trying to impress anyone. He just wanted to see if he could harness the force of a nearby stream. It wasn't exactly a hydroelectric dam, but it was an early sign of his fascination with energy. Fast forward a few years, and you'd find Tesla immersed in the world of mathematics and physics, subjects that offered him both a challenge and a playground. But school wasn't always a smooth ride for Tesla. In fact, it was a bit of a bumpy road filled with some absurd detours. Take his time at the higher real gymnasium in Karlovac, for instance. While his classmates were busy doodling in the margins of their notebooks, Tesla was devouring math problems like they were candy. He could solve integral calculus problems in his head, which was great for his math teacher, but not so much for his peers who thought he was some kind of alien. Teachers were bewildered by his intellect, to say the least, and they weren't quite sure what to do with him. This was Austria-Hungary in the 19th century, mind you, not exactly a hotbed of educational innovation. Then there was the whole pearl situation. Tesla had an inexplicable aversion to pearls. We're talking a full-on, can't even look at them kind of aversion. If someone dared to wear them in his presence, he'd bolt out of the room faster than you can say, alternating current. It's one of those quirks that makes you scratch your head and wonder, was it just an extreme fashion preference, or was there more to it? Maybe pearls reminded him of some childhood trauma, or maybe he just thought they clashed horribly with his suits. Either way, it was part of the eccentric package that was Nikola Tesla. But let's get back to the serious stuff for a second. After finishing his primary education, Tesla moved on to the Graz University of Technology. It was here that he first encountered the Gram dynamo, which could operate as both a motor and a generator. This discovery sparked an idea in Tesla's mind, alternating current. You see, most of the world at that time was hooked on direct current, DC, thanks to Thomas Edison, other heavyweight in the ring of electrical innovation. But Tesla saw potential in AC, a system that could transmit electricity over long distances without losing much power. It was like spotting the potential in an underdog nobody believed in. His time at Graz was also marked by an obsession with the number 3 and its multiples. Tesla had this thing about doing things in threes, whether it was polishing his silverware or walking around a building 3 times before entering. The man was consistent. Was it a nod to some mystical numerology, or just another quirk in his eccentric personality? Who knows, but it certainly added to his enigmatic allure. Despite his brilliance, Tesla didn't finish his studies at Graz. He left without a degree, which might seem like a misstep, but for Tesla, it was just another chapter in a life that defied convention. He had bigger fish to fry, or in his case, bigger currents to alternate. Tesla's journey next took him to the Charles Ferdinand University in Prague, where he continued his studies, albeit informally. But let's not get bogged down in academia. Tesla's education was more about exploration and less about diplomas. As Tesla moved through his early life, his eyes were always set on the horizon, on what could be achieved with the power of electricity. His early inventions and ideas were often met with skepticism, but Tesla had a way of seeing what others couldn't. He was like a lighthouse in a world content with candlelight. Yet this propensity for visionary thinking would also lead him into conflict with more established figures in the world of invention. In short, Tesla was a genius wrapped in a riddle, wrapped in a very well-tailored suit. His early life was a mix of brilliance and bewilderment, setting the stage for a career that would electrify the world, sometimes literally. But while the myths and legends surrounding Tesla are tempting to indulge, it's the man himself, with all his quirks and contradictions, who truly sparks our curiosity. Tesla wasn't just the sum of his inventions. He was a fascinating human being navigating a world that was just beginning to understand the power of electricity. And trust me, the story only gets wilder from here. Now, let's fast forward to 1884 and Tesla's grand arrival in the United States, a place buzzing with opportunity, much like an over-caffeinated inventor. Picture Tesla stepping off the SS Saturnia in New York City with barely 4 cents to his name, a few articles of clothing, and a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison, the reigning champ of the electrical world. This wasn't just any letter. It was penned by Charles Batchelor, Edison's business associate, and it read, "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." No pressure there, right? Tesla was about to step into the electric coliseum of the late 19th century, where egos were as charged as the currents they produced. Edison, the wizard of Menlo Park, had already illuminated parts of Manhattan with his direct current DC system, a technological marvel of its time. DC was like the IT technology, but it had its limitations. It couldn't efficiently travel long distances. Edison, confident and perhaps a bit stubborn, was married to his DC system, and anyone suggesting alternatives might as well have been proposing a new religion. Enter Tesla, the fresh-faced Serbian genius with a mind full of alternating current, AC dreams. While Edison was an incremental innovator, tinkering and refining, Tesla was the kind of guy who imagined a future of massive, sweeping changes. His AC system promised to power cities miles away from a single power station, a concept Edison initially dismissed as impractical. But practicality was never Tesla's concern. He was all about the vision, the possibilities that lay beyond the horizon. Tesla's initial gig with Edison involved redesigning DC generators. The job was promising, but the work environment was less than rosy. Edison's laboratories were the 19th century equivalent of a modern-day startup. Lots of ambition, lots of work, and not a lot of sleep. Tesla worked around 18 hours a day, a testament to his dedication, or maybe just his insomnia. Edison, ever the shrewd businessman, reportedly promised Tesla $50,000, a king's ransom at the time, if he could significantly improve the efficiency of his DC machines. Tesla, ever the optimist, took on the challenge and delivered the goods. But when he came to collect, Edison laughed it off as a joke, telling Tesla he didn't understand American humor. The only thing funnier might have been Tesla's face at that moment, a blend of disbelief and the realization that he'd been played. This was Tesla's cue to exit stage left. He decided to strike out on his own, determined to bring his AC vision to life. Here comes the part where we talk about the war of the currents, a battle as dramatic as any soap opera. It was AC versus DC in a no-holds-barred fight for the future of electricity. In one corner, you had Edison, backed by his DC apparatus, and in the other, Tesla, whose AC system was gaining traction with the financial backing of George Westinghouse, an industrialist who saw the potential in Tesla's ideas. Edison, feeling the heat from the rising AC tide, launched a smear campaign against Tesla's system. He went as far as sponsoring public demonstrations to show the dangers of AC, which involved electrocuting animals. Yes, it was as gruesome as it sounds, and it only added to the circus-like atmosphere surrounding the entire affair. Edison's tactics were meant to scare the public, painting AC as a lethal force, while DC was portrayed as the safer, more civilized option. Despite the theatrics, the economic and practical benefits of AC were hard to ignore. It was cheaper to produce, could travel longer distances, and was more efficient for large-scale distribution. The climax of this electrifying saga came with the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, officially known as the World's Columbian Exposition. Westinghouse and Tesla lit up the fair with AC, proving its viability on a grand scale. It was a spectacle that silenced many critics and firmly established AC as the power source of the future. But Tesla's life wasn't all about high-voltage showdowns and scientific breakthroughs. He had his peculiar obsessions, one of which involved pigeons. Yes, pigeons. Tesla wasn't just an occasional bird watcher. He was a full-fledged avian aficionado. He would visit Bryant Park in New York City to feed and care for these birds, and rumor has it, he even brought injured pigeons back to his hotel room to nurse them back to health. There was one white pigeon in particular that captured his heart, and Tesla claimed he loved her as a man loves a woman. This wasn't just an inventor's eccentricity. It was a deep, genuine affection that showcased Tesla's complex emotional life. So, what's the takeaway here? Tesla's journey from the streets of New York to the halls of scientific fame is a testament to his relentless pursuit of innovation, even when the odds and the establishment were against him. He wasn't just battling Edison and DC. He was fighting for a vision of a world powered by clean, efficient electricity. While the myth of Tesla as a mad scientist persists, the truth is far more intriguing. He was a visionary, yes, but also a man who faced betrayal, hardship, and personal loss. He was human, with all the quirks and contradictions that come with it. Tesla's story doesn't end here, of course. We've only just scratched the surface of his remarkable life. As we look to the horizon, we'll see how his visions continue to shape the world, sometimes in ways even he couldn't have imagined. And while the world was still learning to harness the power of electricity, Tesla was already dreaming of the next big thing. But that, my friends, is a tale for another time. Keep your lights on and your curiosity charged, because the saga of Nikola Tesla continues with more twists and turns than an AC circuit. And so, with dreams of wireless wonders dancing in his head, we find Tesla in the 1890, a decade that was as electrifying as his inventions. Tesla was riding high on the success of alternating current, and the world seemed ripe for his next big idea, wireless communication. Now, before you conjure images of Tesla hunched over a smartphone prototype, let's set the record straight. His vision was more about transmitting power and signals without wires, a concept that was as ambitious as it was borderline sci-fi for the time. Enter Wardenclyffe Tower, Tesla's magnum opus, and the focus of his wireless dreams. Located in Shoreham, Long Island, it was meant to be a global transmission station, a kind of radio tower on steroids. Built in 1901, the tower stood 187 feet tall, crowned with a 68-foot copper dome that gleamed like a beacon of the future. If it worked, Tesla believed he could send wireless signals across the Atlantic Ocean and even power remote locations, sans power lines. Talk about thinking large scale. But as grand as this vision was, it was also a financial black hole. The project was a costly endeavor, with estimates running upwards of $150,000. Today, that's over $4 million. Tesla, ever the optimist, managed to attract investors like J.P. Morgan, who initially pitched in $150,000 to help get things off the ground. But here's the kicker. Morgan expected a return on investment that involved commercial radio, while Tesla was more interested in free universal power. A slight misalignment of goals, you might say. Morgan was a businessman, not a philanthropist, and when he realized Tesla's ambitions were more altruistic than lucrative, he pulled the plug faster than you can say, "Sorry, Nikola." With funding drying up, Wardenclyffe's construction stalled, and Tesla's dream began to crumble under the weight of financial reality. This wasn't just a personal setback, it was a public one too. The media, which once praised Tesla as a genius, began to question his sanity. Was he a visionary or just another eccentric with more ideas than dollars? Spoiler alert, he was a bit of both. Financial woes aside, Tesla had another battle on his hands, his fear of germs. You see, Tesla was a germaphobe before it was trendy. Obsessed with cleanliness, he would use dozens of napkins during meals and refuse to shake hands, a habit that, in today's world, might have made him the patron saint of social distancing. His aversion to germs was so intense that it bordered on obsessive-compulsive behavior. Some say it was a result of his upbringing. Others chalk it up to the stress of living in New York City at the turn of the century, a place not exactly known for its hygiene. Either way, it added to his reputation as a reclusive oddball. Speaking of isolation, Tesla was a loner by choice. Despite his charisma and flair for the dramatic, he preferred the company of his own thoughts to that of others. He was known to work tirelessly through the night, fueled by his vivid imagination and an almost mystical belief in his destiny to change the world. And while this solitary lifestyle kept him productive, it also left him vulnerable, especially when it came to his finances. Tesla's knack for attracting eccentric investors was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, he had a talent for convincing wealthy patrons to fund his projects, often with little more than a handshake and a promise of groundbreaking innovation. On the other hand, these investors were sometimes as unpredictable as Tesla himself. Take John Jacob Astor Roman IV, who invested $100,000 in Tesla's work with the hope of seeing a return in wireless lighting. When that didn't pan out, Astor reportedly demanded his money back, leaving Tesla scrambling to make ends meet. Despite these setbacks, Tesla never lost sight of his vision. He continued to work on wireless technology, believing it would one day connect the world in ways unimaginable. And while Wardenclyffe Tower never fulfilled its promise, it laid the groundwork for future innovations in radio and telecommunications. Tesla's ideas were ahead of their time, and history has a funny way of catching up with visionaries, albeit at its own pace. So, what do we make of Tesla's 1890s peak? It was a time of great triumphs and even greater trials. He stood on the cusp of a wireless revolution, yet found himself mired in financial and personal struggles. His life was a balancing act between the romantic ideals of a world united by technology and the harsh realities of a world governed by money and skepticism. As we delve deeper into his later years, we'll see how these themes of ambition, isolation, and innovation continue to shape his legacy. Tesla's story is far from over, and as we move forward, the twists and turns of his journey will only become more intriguing. What lies ahead is a tale of perseverance, passion, and the relentless pursuit of a dream that would eventually transcend the man himself. So, stay tuned as we continue our exploration of Nikola Tesla, the inventor who dared to imagine the impossible, and in doing so, changed the course of history. Tesla's story continues with more twists and turns than a twisty straw at a child's birthday party, except this party had a rather somber guest list. As the 20th century marched on, Tesla's life became a fascinating blend of brilliance and isolation, with a touch of the absurd for good measure. You see, the world was changing, and so was Tesla's place within it. By the 1930, Tesla's reputation as an innovator had started to fade like an old Polaroid left in the sun. The world was busy grappling with the Great Depression, and the economic landscape was as dire as Tesla's dwindling bank account. Once the darling of the scientific community, Tesla was now seen more as an eccentric relic of a bygone era. But like any good protagonist, he wasn't about to exit stage left without making a final, dramatic stand. Enter the infamous birthday press conferences. Picture Tesla, the once celebrated inventor, now holding court in a New York hotel room every year on his birthday, spilling the beans on his latest and greatest ideas to an audience thirsty for spectacle. It was a bit like announcing the next big blockbuster, except the special effects were all in Tesla's mind. Each year, the press would gather, hoping for the scoop of the century. Tesla would oblige with tantalizing tales of future tech, like his much-discussed death ray. Ah, the death ray. Just saying it conjures images of sci-fi thrillers and villainous lairs. Tesla claimed he had developed a weapon so powerful it could bring down fleets of aircraft from hundreds of miles away. He called it a teleforce weapon. a kind of particle beam cannon that, if it existed, would make any supervillain envious. Tesla pitched it as a means to end all wars, arguing that its very existence would deter conflict. While the idea was compelling, it was never actually built. Some say it was because Tesla couldn't secure funding. Others speculate he might have been pulling one over on the press. Regardless, the myth of the death ray added another layer to Tesla's already formidable legend. But let's not get too carried away with the drama. The reality was far less glamorous. Tesla's financial situation was increasingly precarious. The Great Depression was like a financial black hole, sucking in anyone and anything that wasn't securely anchored. Tesla's patents weren't bringing in the royalties they once did, and his projects were often too ambitious for the cautious investors of the time. Imagine trying to sell ice cream in Antarctica. There just weren't many takers. Now, let's talk pigeons. Yes, pigeons. They played a surprisingly significant role in Tesla's later life, and not just as city-dwelling nuisances. Tesla developed a peculiar affection for these birds, spending countless hours in parks feeding them and nursing injured ones back to health. One particular white pigeon captured Tesla's heart. He claimed she visited him daily and even communicated with him, an assertion that's as touching as it is eccentric. For Tesla, this pigeon represented a kind of companionship he didn't find in most humans. He even went so far as to say that as long as she was alive, there was purpose in his life. When she died, he reportedly felt a deep sense of loss, a poignant reminder of his isolation. Isolation, you see, was Tesla's constant companion in those later years. While he once mingled with the elite of New York society, rubbing elbows with the likes of Mark Twain, he now lived a more reclusive existence. He moved from one hotel to another, his possessions dwindling with each relocation. The opulence of the Waldorf Astoria, where he once resided, was a far cry from the humbler Hotel New Yorker, which became his final home. His life had become a series of hotel rooms and personal experiments, a far cry from the bustling laboratories and grand demonstrations of his heyday. Yet, despite the solitude, Tesla's mind was as restless as ever. He continued to dream up inventions that would alter the fabric of reality, at least in theory. From harnessing cosmic rays to transmitting energy wirelessly, his ideas were as bold as they were untested. But the world wasn't ready for Tesla's vision, or perhaps it was just too preoccupied with more immediate concerns, like surviving the economic turmoil. The Great Depression didn't just impact Tesla's bank account, it also affected his legacy. With money tight, the priorities of the time shifted away from speculative technologies to more practical innovations. Tesla's contributions to AC power were largely overshadowed by his more outlandish claims, and his reputation as a serious scientist suffered as a result. Yet, as much as the world seemed to forget him, the seeds of his brilliance were quietly taking root in the technologies of the future. So, what do we make of this period in Tesla's life? It's a study in contrasts. A man of immense intellect grappling with the limitations of his era, a visionary who saw the future but struggled to make ends meet in the present. He was both revered and ridiculed, a figure of both admiration and pity. And while his later years were marked by increased isolation, they were also a testament to his unwavering commitment to his ideas, no matter how far-fetched they seemed to others. As we edge closer to the conclusion of Tesla's life, it's worth pondering the dual nature of his legacy. On one hand, he was an inventor of unparalleled genius, whose contributions laid the groundwork for many of the technologies we take for granted today. On the other, he was a man whose eccentricities often overshadowed his achievements, leaving him as much a figure of myth as of science. But as we'll discover in our final chapter, the true measure of Tesla's impact can't be confined to his lifetime alone. In the end, Tesla's story is one of perseverance in the face of adversity, of dreams that dared to defy the limits of human imagination. It's a reminder that innovation often springs from the unlikeliest of sources, and that even in isolation, the human spirit can soar to incredible heights. So, as we prepare to delve into the final act of Tesla's remarkable life, let's keep our minds open and our curiosity unbound. The saga of Nikola Tesla isn't just history. It's a testament to the power of vision and the enduring legacy of a man who dared to dream. And so, with one foot in the grave and the other still tiptoeing through the corridors of genius, we find Nikola Tesla in the final chapter of his life. In 1943, At the ripe old age of 86, Tesla passed away in room 3327 of the New Yorker Hotel, leaving behind a legacy as electrifying as his inventions. But let's not rush to the end credits just yet. Tesla's closing years are a cocktail of innovation, hardship, and the kind of eccentricity that makes for great tabloid fodder. Living in a small hotel room that cost $7 a week, Tesla was hardly rolling in dough. Despite his monumental contributions to the world of technology, he was as financially unstable as a house of cards in a wind tunnel. His wealth had evaporated faster than a puddle in the Sahara, a sobering testament to the fact that brilliance doesn't always pay the bills. In Tesla's case, it seemed that genius came with a price tag he couldn't quite afford. But even in his twilight years, Tesla's mind was a whirlwind of ideas. He spent his days feeding pigeons and poring over his notebooks, as if trying to capture lightning in a bottle one last time. He was still dreaming of wireless energy and cosmic rays, visions that danced tantalizingly out of reach. These weren't just flights of fancy. They were the echoes of a mind that refused to be bound by the limitations of its era. While the world was embroiled in the chaos of World War II, Tesla was still dreaming of a future where energy flowed as freely as ideas. Speaking of ideas, let's talk about Tesla's posthumous fame, a phenomenon as unexpected as it was well-deserved. In life, he was often overshadowed by contemporaries like Edison, had a knack for public relations that Tesla sorely lacked. But in death, Tesla became a symbol of the misunderstood genius, the quintessential underdog who dared to dream big. His patents, once ignored, became the foundation for countless technological breakthroughs. The irony, he was celebrated more in death than he ever was in life, a classic case of too little, too late. Fast forward to the modern era, and Tesla's influence is as pervasive as Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. His work on alternating current laid the groundwork for the electrical grid that powers our daily lives. The irony is as thick as a New York cheesecake. Tesla, the man who died penniless, is now revered as a pioneer whose ideas light up the world, literally. His legacy is a potent reminder that innovation often thrives on the fringes, where visionaries like Tesla dare to tread. But let's not get too swept up in romanticizing his legacy. Tesla we celebrate today is as much a creation of myth as of fact. The man behind the legend was a complex tapestry of genius and eccentricity, a loner who embraced solitude even as he sought to revolutionize the world. In the years following his death, Tesla's name has become synonymous with everything from electric cars to cutting-edge research. Companies and inventors proudly bear his name, a nod to the man who dreamed of a world united by technology. Yet, for all his contributions, Tesla's life is a cautionary tale about the chasm between vision and reality. His dreams were often grander than his means, and his ideas sometimes outpaced the era in which he lived. The practical challenges he faced were as daunting as the inventions he sought to create. It's a testament to the harsh reality that even the brightest minds can falter when faced with the gritty demands of economics and societal skepticism. As we reflect on Tesla's legacy, it's clear that his impact is both profound and paradoxical. He was a man of contradictions, a brilliant scientist who struggled with financial instability, a visionary whose ideas were both ahead of their time and at times too fantastical for practical application. His life reminds us that innovation is rarely a smooth road. It's a winding path filled with setbacks and triumphs, challenges and breakthroughs. In the end, Tesla's story isn't just about the man himself. It's about the enduring power of ideas and the ways in which they can transcend the limitations of their creators. Tesla's legacy is a beacon for dreamers and doers alike, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, the human spirit can soar to incredible heights. His life may have ended in relative obscurity, but his contributions continue to illuminate the world in ways he could only have imagined. So, as we close the book on Nikola Tesla's remarkable journey, let's keep the lights on and the curiosity burning. Tesla's story is far from over, for his legacy lives on in every flicker of a light bulb, every hum of an electric motor, and every leap forward in the world of technology. He may have been a man of his time, but his ideas belong to the ages, a fitting tribute to the inventor who dared to dream beyond the horizon. In a land where wine flowed more freely than water and kings were measured by their ability to interpret the entrails of sheep, The Etruscans carved out a civilization that was as enigmatic as it was influential. Nestled in the heart of what is now Italy, this ancient society thrived between the 8th and 3rd centuries BCE, leaving behind a legacy that would befuddle historians and inspire artists for millennia. So, let's roll up our metaphorical toga sleeves and dive into the world of the Etruscans, where the line between divine intervention and a really good guess was often as thin as a papyrus scroll. The Etruscans set up shop in a region known as Etruria, which today encompasses parts of Tuscany, Umbria, and Lazio. Yes, that Tuscany, the one with the rolling hills and vineyards, which was apparently a thing even back then. Etruscans must have known a good real estate deal when they saw one. Their civilization blossomed in this fertile landscape, strategically located between the Greek colonies of the south and the looming presence of Rome to the north. This geographical sweet spot meant that the Etruscans were both influencers and influenced. Imagine them as the ancient world's equivalent of a cultural Switzerland, minus the neutrality. Now, when it comes to religion, the Etruscans didn't just dabble, they went all in. The pantheon was a heady mix of local deities and imported gods, a divine cocktail shaken up by their interactions with neighboring Greeks and Romans. You could say they were spiritual magpies, picking up shiny bits of theology from across the Mediterranean. They had gods for everything. Tinia, the sky god, was their answer to Zeus, while Uni, his consort, was a proto-Juno. And then there was Terms, the messenger god, who must have had the Etruscan version of a Fitbit for all the running around he did between the heavens and earth. But let's not kid ourselves. There's no drama like divine drama. The Etruscan gods were known for their fiery tempers and insatiable appetites for sacrifice. Animal sacrifices were an Etruscan staple, and they didn't skimp on the sheep. One can only imagine the celestial barbecue that ensued every time a particularly juicy ram was offered up to placate the gods. The Etruscans believed these sacrifices were essential to maintain the Pax Deorum, or peace of the gods, a concept that sounds lovely until you realize it involved a lot of entrails and probably a fair amount of dry cleaning. The Etruscan religion was a heady mix of fear, respect, and a touch of theatrical flair. Their priests, known as haruspices, were the original fortune-tellers, using the livers of sacrificed animals to predict everything from the weather to the outcome of battles. That's right, your fate was determined by what essentially amounted to a liver Rorschach test. If that sounds a bit icky, remember that these were people who thought the gods communicated through lightning bolts and bird flight patterns. It's like they had their own divine version of Twitter, complete with cryptic messages and the occasional stormy reply. Despite the Etruscans' penchant for divine drama and a good sacrifice, they were also astute observers of their neighbors. The Greeks, with their pantheon of gods and penchant for philosophical musings, were a major influence. The Etruscans borrowed heavily from Greek art and mythology, adopting gods like Heracles, Hercule to the Etruscans, into their own religious tapestry. Meanwhile, the Romans, who were still finding their toga-clad feet, were watching the Etruscans closely. The Etruscan kings ruled over Rome for a time, and many Roman religious practices can trace their origins back to these mysterious predecessors. Think of it as a sort of cultural osmosis, where the Etruscans were both mentors and muses to the burgeoning Roman state. Yet, for all their influence, the Etruscans remain something of an enigma. Much of what we know about them comes from the writings of their neighbors, Greeks and Romans who had their own agendas and biases. Etruscan texts are rare, and their language, though partially deciphered, remains largely mysterious. It's as if they left us tantalizing breadcrumbs of their existence, but the full loaf has long since been devoured by time. But perhaps that's what makes them so fascinating. A civilization that thrived in the shadows of history, whispering its secrets through the art and tombs it left behind. So, as we peer into the mists of time, it's clear that the Etruscans were more than just a footnote in the annals of history. They were a vibrant, complex society that left an indelible mark on the cultures that followed. Whether through their religious practices, their artistic achievements, or their political cunning, the Etruscans were the original masters of reinvention, adapting and thriving in a constantly changing world. And as we continue to unravel their story, one thing is certain. The Etruscans knew how to keep us guessing. As we delve deeper into the Etruscan world, it's time to explore the fascinating, if somewhat grisly, practices of divination that occupied center stage in their religious and political life. If you're thinking of something akin to reading tea leaves, think again, because the Etruscans' version involved a lot more guts. Literally. Welcome to the world of haruspicy and augury, where the divine met the digestive. Haruspicy, a term that sounds like a sneeze but was actually a sacred science, involved inspecting the entrails of sacrificed animals, usually sheep, because why waste a good cow steak on prophecy? The idea was that the gods communicated their will through the patterns found in the liver, intestines, and other squishy bits. It's like they had a celestial group chat, but the messages were encrypted in offal. To a 21st century palate, this might sound like the culinary equivalent of a horror movie, but for the Etruscans, it was the key to understanding the universe. The Etruscan haruspices, who could be considered the rock stars of their religious scene, were tasked with interpreting these divine messages. They wielded considerable power, not just over religious matters, but also in the political arena. Imagine being able to sway the course of a city's future based on your interpretation of a sheep's liver. In a world without polls or pundits, these priests were the ultimate opinion leaders. They had the power to bless military campaigns, approve public works, or even decide when to hold a festival. And let's face it, any reason to throw a party was a good one. While haruspicy was examining entrails, augury took to the skies. Augurs, another class of Etruscan priests, were the ancient world's ornithologists, but with a divine twist. They didn't just watch birds. They analyzed their flight patterns to predict the future. If a bird flew left, it might mean your crops would fail or your in-laws would visit. If it flew right, perhaps it was a good day to propose a new tax. The possibilities, much like the birds, were endless. This was less about bird watching and more about bird whispering. Now, why would a civilization so concerned with the divine will rely on such seemingly arbitrary practices? The answer lies in the Etruscans' view of the world as a place deeply intertwined with the supernatural. To them, the gods were not distant deities on a mountaintop, but active players in daily life. They believed that every event, no matter how mundane, was part of a grand cosmic narrative. In this context, divination was less about fortune-telling and more about seeking guidance from the divine GPS. But here's where it gets interesting. These practices were not just religious rituals, they were also political tools. Priests held sway over public policy, and their interpretations of the gods could make or break careers. If a haruspect declared that the entrails were unfavorable before a battle, a general might find himself suddenly unpopular. Conversely, favorable auguries could bolster support for ambitious public projects. It was politics by another name, albeit with added entrails. Of course, the appeal of these practices wasn't just about power. It was also about reassurance. In a world where life was as unpredictable as the Mediterranean weather, having a system, however bizarre, gave people a sense of control. It was a comfort to believe that the gods had a plan, even if it was written in sheep guts. This blend of faith and pragmatism is something that resonates even today. After all, humans have always had a knack for finding patterns where none might exist, whether in the stars, the stock market, or the latest internet meme. Yet, for all their mystical allure, these practices also reveal a lot about the Etruscans as a people. They were deeply spiritual, yes, but they were also realists. They understood that religion and politics were two sides of the same coin, and they were adept at flipping it to their advantage. It's a reminder that while the methods may have changed, the interplay between belief and power is as old as civilization itself. So, as we leave behind the bloody business of divination, we can appreciate the Etruscans' unique blend of religion and politics. It was a system that was as much about interpreting the will of the gods as it was about managing the affairs of men. And while we might chuckle at the thought of interpreting a sheep's liver today, it's worth remembering that for the Etruscans, this was the cutting edge of divine communication. It's a testament to their ingenuity and their ability to find meaning in the most unexpected places. As we continue to unravel the mystery of the Etruscans, we'll see how their religious practices influenced the world around them, leaving an enduring legacy that still echoes in the corridors of history. But for now, let's take a moment to appreciate the strange, wonderful world of Etruscan divination, a place where the divine and the digestive danced a curious tango, and where the fate of a civilization could hinge on the flight of a bird or the turn of a gut. Now, as we pivot from the world of sheep guts and celestial bird watching, let's take a leisurely stroll through something a bit more architectural. The Etruscans, it turns out, were not just masters of divination, but also had a knack for designing places to house all that divine hullabaloo. Picture this. Although not too vividly, their temples and tombs, those grand stone edifices, weren't just mere buildings. They were a testament to the Etruscans' flair for combining function with a touch of the divine. First off, let's talk temples. When you think of Etruscan temples, imagine a cross between a Greek temple and a Roman basilica, with a little extra flair thrown in for good measure. These structures were typically built on high podiums with wide, inviting staircases. Why the elevation? Well, in the real estate world of the Etruscan guards, a view was everything. A better view meant a better Wi-Fi connection to the heavens, or so they believed. Most temples featured deep columned porches, known as pronaos, which served both religious and social purposes. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of a VIP lounge, exclusive access only for those in the divine know. The materials used were often humble, wood and mud brick being the construction materials of choice, though it wasn't for lack of ambition. Stone was scarce, and importing it was pricier than a bottle of vintage Chianti. Instead, they opted for painted terracotta to embellish their temples, giving them a distinctive, colorful appearance. If the Greeks were all about the white marble aesthetic, the Etruscans were more like the bohemian artists who splashed their world with color. The roofs were adorned with terracotta statues, often depicting gods, mythological scenes, or whatever caught the artist's fancy that week, like an ancient Pinterest board. These temples weren't just for show. They were the spiritual and administrative heart of Etruscan cities. They housed the divine, sure, but they also functioned as civic centers where decisions were made, treaties were signed, and the occasional toga party might break out. The Romans, ever the astute observers, watched and learned. Many elements of Roman temple design, such as the use of the podium and the frontal staircase, were borrowed from these Etruscan precedents. The Romans, bless their pragmatic hearts, saw what worked and ran with it, much like they did with most things Etruscan. Now, if temples were the Etruscan way of reaching for the heavens, their tombs were a means of grounding their dead. The Etruscans, true to their penchant for drama, built necropolises that rivaled the size of their cities. These were not mere resting places, but elaborate underground houses, replete with everything a spirit might need in the afterlife. The rich had it good, stone-carved beds, dining rooms, and even kitchens. Yes, kitchens, because apparently the afterlife required a good meal prep plan. The most famous of these is the Banditaxia necropolis in Servadary, spanning over 400 hectares. That's over 990 acres of eternal real estate, folks. The tombs here are a marvel of engineering, with some resembling huts and others mimicking the grand villas of the living. These subterranean homes were decorated with vibrant frescoes, depicting everything from banquets to gladiatorial games. It's like they thought, why should the living have all the fun? The Etruscans believed in celebrating life, even in death, and their tombs were designed to reflect this philosophy. But let's not get too carried away with the grandeur. There's a myth that the Etruscans were architectural geniuses, but the reality is a bit more nuanced. While they were indeed pioneers in certain engineering techniques, like the use of arches, many of their supposed innovations were actually borrowed or adapted from their neighbors. The Greeks and Egyptians were the real trendsetters, and the Etruscans, ever the opportunists, knew how to spot a good idea when they saw one. They were more like the cool kids who could pull off any trend, even if they didn't start it. The Etruscan approach to art and architecture was deeply intertwined with their religious beliefs. Every column, every fresco, every terracotta decoration was infused with symbolism. The intricate patterns and motifs found in Etruscan art often represented the duality of life and death, the interplay between the mortal and the divine. It's like their entire architectural philosophy was a cosmic balance sheet, keeping tabs on the living and the dead. The influence of Etruscan architecture and art on Roman culture can't be overstated. As the Romans expanded, they absorbed Etruscan cities, and with them, the architectural wisdom embedded in their stones. The iconic Roman arch, for instance, has Etruscan roots. While the Romans are often credited with perfecting it, the Etruscans were the ones who first utilized it in their city gates and bridges. So next time you walk under a Roman arch, give a silent nod to the Etruscans for laying the groundwork, literally. As we wander through the art and architecture of the Etruscans, it's clear that their legacy is a tapestry woven with borrowed threads and bold designs. They were the ultimate cultural magpies, picking up shiny bits from around the Mediterranean and crafting something uniquely their own. Their temples and tombs stand as a testament to a civilization that understood the power of place and the importance of leaving a mark, both in life and in death. So, as we continue our journey through the enigmatic world of the Etruscans, remember that behind every stone and fresco lies a story of innovation, adaptation, and a fair bit of artistic flair. While their civilization may have faded into the mists of history, their influence endures, echoing through the ages in the very structures we admire today. And as we move forward, exploring the remaining mysteries of this fascinating culture, let's keep the momentum going, because the Etruscans, it seems, still have a few secrets left to share. As we continue to explore the enigmatic world of the Etruscans, we must now peel back the layers of the romanticized myth of the noble savage and confront some of the grimmer realities of their society. The Etruscans, often painted as a mysterious and even mystical people, were no strangers to the harsh and sometimes brutal practices that characterize ancient civilizations. Let's just say, if you think ancient life was all toga parties and wine, you're in for a reality check. Let's dive into the Etruscan social hierarchy, a system that would make even the most ardent Game of Thrones fan take a step back. At the top of the Etruscan food chain were the aristocrats, the Lucumons, who were essentially the big cheeses of Etruria. These weren't just any nobles lounging around in their villas. They had real power. Think of them as the board of directors of Etruscan society, with the added bonus of divine favor if the auguries were in their favor. These elites were often buried in those grand tombs we chatted about earlier, complete with all the trappings of wealth and status they could carry into the afterlife. But let's not sugarcoat it. Beneath this polished exterior lay a society that wasn't always so civilized. The Etruscans practiced human sacrifice as part of their religious rituals, a fact that tends to get glossed over in the rose-tinted narratives. Human sacrifices weren't just a macabre spectacle. They were seen as a crucial means of appeasing the gods and ensuring the survival of the community. It's like they believed the gods needed a human-sized piece, offering every so often to keep the divine Wi-Fi connection strong. Now, before you start picturing mass rituals like something out of an Indiana Jones movie, let's add some perspective. Human sacrifice wasn't a daily event. It was reserved for special occasions, like the dedication of a temple or the consecration of a city. And while it might sound barbaric to our modern ears, it was a practice rooted in the belief that such offerings could avert disaster and ensure prosperity. It's the kind of logic that only makes sense when your society is steeped in the notion that the divine is actively involved in your everyday affairs. This brings us to another gritty aspect of Etruscan life: slavery. While the Etruscans were busy borrowing the best bits from their Greek and Roman neighbors, they also adopted the less savory elements of their societies. Slaves were not just a part of the Etruscan economy, they were essential to it. The labor force that built those grand temples and necropolises we so admire was largely composed of enslaved individuals. These people were the unsung architects of Etruscan glory, their contributions often overshadowed by the grandeur of the structures they helped create. The Etruscans, like many ancient societies, had a complex relationship with their slaves. On one hand, they were economic assets, used for everything from agriculture to domestic service. On the other, there was a recognition, albeit a limited one, of their humanity. Some slaves were able to earn their freedom, and a few even rose to positions of influence within the household. But let's not romanticize it too much. The reality was that slavery was a brutal and dehumanizing institution, a stark reminder of the inequalities that underpinned Etruscan society. In this hierarchical world, social mobility was about as likely as pleasing all the gods in one go. The Etruscans were not big on the concept of upward mobility. If you were born a peasant, chances were that you'd remain one, with your life dictated by the whims of the aristocracy and the caprices of the gods. Yet, despite these rigid structures, the Etruscans were surprisingly adaptable. They were adept at navigating the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined their interactions with surrounding cultures. And speaking of adaptability, let's not forget the Etruscans' penchant for crafting their own narratives. They were masters of ancient PR, spinning tales that often obscured the more unsavory aspects of their society. While human sacrifice and slavery were very much part of their reality, the Etruscans were also skilled at portraying themselves in a more palatable light. They knew the power of a good story, a trait that perhaps resonated with the Romans, who would later perfect the art of propaganda. So, as we peel back the layers of Etruscan society, we're left with a civilization that was as complex as it was enigmatic. They were a people of contradictions, capable of both great beauty and great brutality. Their religious practices, while fascinating, reveal a darker side to their society, one that challenges the notion of the noble savage. Yet, it's this very complexity that makes them so compelling. As we leave behind the shadows of Etruscan rituals and hierarchies, we find ourselves poised to explore the broader impact of their civilization. The Etruscans, with all their quirks and contradictions, left an indelible mark on the cultures that followed. And as we continue to unravel their story, we'll see how their legacy, often obscured by time and myth, continues to echo through the ages. But for now, let's take a moment to appreciate the Etruscans for what they were, a truly human society, with all the messiness and magnificence that entails. As we wrap up our whirlwind tour of Etruscan society, it's time to zoom out and see how this enigmatic civilization left its fingerprints all over the canvas of history. If the Etruscans were a song, they'd be that catchy tune you can't quite place but can't stop humming. Their influence on Roman culture was subtle but profound, like a spice in a dish that you can't see but can't live without. So, what exactly did the Romans pick up from their mysterious neighbors? Well, buckle up, because we're about to dive into the legacy of the Etruscans, an epic tale of cultural osmosis and divine hand-me-downs. First off, let's talk about the big kahuna of Roman religion, the pantheon itself. The Romans, never ones to reinvent the wheel if someone else had already done the hard work, borrowed heavily from Etruscan deities. Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, the Roman equivalents of the Etruscan Tinia, Uni, and Minerva, became the central figures of Roman worship. It was like the Romans took the Etruscan godly lineup, gave them Latin names, and called it a day. And let's not overlook the practice of divination. The Roman fascination with augury and haruspicy, reading the future in bird flights and sheep guts, was a direct import from Etruria. Roman priests, or augurs, were the spiritual descendants of Etruscan diviners, proving that some traditions are too juicy to pass up, even if they involve intestines. But the Etruscan legacy wasn't all about spiritual matters. The Romans also adopted the Etruscan knack for political theater. The Etruscans had a flair for mixing religion with governance, and the Romans took that baton and sprinted with it. The role of the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, was a political powerhouse position, an office that Julius Caesar famously held before his rise to power. The intertwining of religion and politics became a hallmark of Roman society, a legacy that echoes through history whenever church and state decide to tango. And let's be real, when it comes to the perennial dance of religion and politics, the Etruscans were the original choreographers. Moving from religion to architecture, Roman engineering owes a hefty debt to Etruscan innovation. The Etruscan expertise with the arch and vault was the structural backbone of Roman construction. The iconic Roman aqueducts, those marvels of ancient engineering, wouldn't have been possible without Etruscan know-how. The Romans may have perfected the art, but it was the Etruscans who laid the groundwork, literally. And while we're at it, let's not forget the toga. Yes, the quintessential Roman garment, immortalized in countless marble statues, was an Etruscan import. So next time you see a toga party, remember to give a nod to the fashion-forward Etruscans. Now, you might be wondering, why do we still care about the Etruscans? After all, they vanished from the historical stage over 2 millennia ago. The truth is, the Etruscans embody the allure of the unknown. Their partially deciphered language and enigmatic art captivate historians and archaeologists alike, offering tantalizing glimpses into a world that was both familiar and foreign. They remind us that history is not just a linear progression of events, but a tapestry of interconnected cultures, each leaving its mark on the others. The Etruscans were the silent architects of Roman greatness, and their legacy endures in ways both visible and hidden. As we reflect on the Etruscan legacy, it's tempting to romanticize their world as a time of mystery and magic. But let's not kid ourselves. History has a way of repeating the same old tune with different lyrics. The Etruscans teach us that the blending of religion and politics, the borrowing and adapting of cultures, and the constant push and pull of power dynamics are as old as civilization itself. If anything, the Etruscans are a reminder that the more things change, the more they stay the same. Whether through divine drama or architectural ingenuity, their influence is a testament to the enduring power of cultural exchange. So, as we bid farewell to the Etruscans, let's carry their legacy with us, not just as a historical curiosity, but as a reminder of the complexities and contradictions that make us human. History may be written by the victors, but it's lived by the dreamers, the innovators, and yes, even the sheep-gut readers. The Etruscans may have been absorbed into the Roman juggernaut, but their story is far from forgotten. And as we continue to uncover the layers of their civilization, let's remember that the past is never truly past. It's a part of the ever-evolving narrative of who we are. In the grand tapestry of history, the Etruscans are a vibrant thread, weaving their way through the fabric of time. They remind us that behind every great empire lies a mosaic of influences, each contributing to the rich tapestry of human experience. So, here's to the Etruscans, a people who knew how to blend the sacred with the profane, the practical with the mystical, and who left a legacy that still resonates today. As we close the book on this chapter of history, let's carry forward the spirit of curiosity and wonder that the Etruscans inspire, knowing that the stories of the past continue to shape the world we live in.